They gave a wild horse to the blind girl just to mock her. But when it knelt before her, no one could hold back their tears. Emma Sullivan's fingers danced across the worn plastic edges of her iPod, feeling for the familiar scratch near the volume button. It was her compass, her only material treasure, a relic from before darkness had claimed her world. Dawn filtered through the dormitory windows of Sunshine Children's Home, touching 20 beds arranged in military precision. But Emma had been awake for hours, listening to the building stir to life. She pressed play, and the gentle strains of an Appalachian folk ballad seeped through her earbuds, her mother's favorite. 8 years since the accident, and still her chest tightened at the memory of her mother singing these same songs while braiding Emma's hair. "Still with that old thing?" Liza's voice came from the neighboring bed, tinged with the usual mixture of pity and mild disdain. "They make smartphones with voice commands now, you know." Emma smiled politely, tucking the iPod into the pocket of her worn sweater. "This one works just fine." Her fingers traced the edge of her nightstand until they found her folded white cane. The morning routine was automatic after 8 years at Sunshine. Bed made with hospital corners, clothes selected from the carefully organized drawers, teeth brushed with toothpaste measured to exactly 1 centimeter on the brush. Independence, Mrs. Winters always emphasized, was the greatest gift they could give their special cases. The day smelled different. Excitement and anxiety perfumed the air as girls rushed around preparing. Emma absorbed the chaos through her heightened senses. Sneakers squeaking against linoleum, whispers about cute boys they might see, the rustle of best clothes being retrieved from closets. "Ladies, breakfast in 15 minutes, then assembly." Mrs. Winters' voice carried down the corridor, her sensible shoes creating a rhythmic tattoo against the floor. The director's pace, always exactly 72 steps per minute, was a metronome by which Emma often oriented her day. At breakfast, Emma sat at her usual table, the one nearest the kitchen door where the clattering of dishes provided a cover for her sometimes awkward attempts at eating without assistance. She was midway through her toast when Mrs. Winters clinked a glass for attention. "Today's excursion to Blue Ridge Farm is a rare privilege," she announced, her voice carrying the particular cadence of someone who'd spent decades herding children. "The Cooper family rarely opens their championship equestrian facility to the public. Remember, you are representatives of Sunshine, and I expect perfect behavior." Emma felt the weight of several stares. Field trips were always complicated for her. Well-meaning teachers constantly narrating what she couldn't see. Peers awkwardly trying to guide her. Strangers speaking loudly as if blindness affected hearing. "Hey, Fada dos Bichos," whispered Trey from the table behind, using the half-affectionate, half-mocking nickname that had followed Emma since she'd nursed a wounded sparrow back to health 3 years ago. "Maybe you can talk to the fancy horses. Tell them our secrets." Emma didn't respond. The nickname had begun when the younger children genuinely believed she possessed fairy magic that allowed her to communicate with animals. The older ones now used it ironically, but she didn't mind. Animals were easier than people. They never pitied, never judged, never stared at the scarred skin around her unseeing eyes. After breakfast, Emma retreated to her windowsill, her sanctuary. The morning sun warmed her face as her sensitive fingertips gently stroked the wing of a cardinal with a damaged feather that had taken to visiting her. "You're getting stronger," she whispered as the bird hopped trustingly along her palm. "Soon you'll fly again." The cardinal chirped in response, a sound Emma interpreted as agreement. She'd discovered early after losing her sight that her other senses compensated in extraordinary ways. She could detect a storm coming hours before others noticed darkening skies, identify people by the unique cadence of their breathing, and somehow, in ways that earned her the fairy nickname, sense the emotions of animals with uncanny accuracy. The bus ride to Blue Ridge Farm was 43 minutes of chaos. Emma counted each turn, mentally mapping their journey beyond the familiar boundaries of Lexington into the rolling bluegrass countryside. When the bus finally stopped, the gasps of her peers told her they'd arrived somewhere impressive. "It's like a castle," whispered Keisha beside her. "Everything's so perfect. White fences stretching forever, buildings shinier than our school, and horses that look like they're made of glass. Emma absorbed the new environment through her other senses. The rich, earthy smell of manure underlying expensive cologne, leather, and some floral landscaping. The distant rhythmic thunder of hooves on packed earth. The crisp autumn air carrying voices with the particular inflection of wealth and privilege. "Welcome to Blue Ridge Farm," announced a deep, resonant voice as they disembarked. "I'm Randall Cooper, fifth-generation horseman and owner of this facility." Emma detected notes in his voice that others might miss: pride bordering on arrogance, the slight condescension of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "We've won the Kentucky Derby 3 times, the Preakness 5 times, and hold more championship bloodlines than any stable in the eastern United States," Cooper continued as he led the group. "Excellence isn't accidental. It requires discipline, investment, and an uncompromising commitment to perfection." The tour proceeded through trophy rooms, where Cooper narrated victories, past gleaming stables where grooms worked in silent efficiency, and alongside training rings where magnificent animals performed with mechanical precision. Emma followed, absorbing the atmosphere of wealth and achievement that seemed to suffocate the natural joy she usually associated with animals. "The average horse at Blue Ridge is valued at more than most of your family homes," Cooper explained, his words carefully shaped to sound informational rather than boastful. "Our stud fees begin at $50,000, with waiting lists years long for our champion bloodlines." As the tour continued, Emma noticed something odd. Beneath the polished exterior, the farm felt tense. Employees spoke in hushed tones, training sessions were conducted with military rigidity, and even the horses seemed to move with unnatural restraint. "Psst, Brett, check this out," whispered a young male voice as the group paused near what Emma assumed was another display of Cooper's achievements. "She the blind one?" responded another voice, younger, with the same resonant quality as Randall Cooper, but laced with entitlement rather than accomplishment. Emma pretended not to hear, a skill perfected through years of navigating a world that often spoke about her as if her blindness made her deaf or stupid as well. "Yeah, they call her the Animal Fairy or something," the first voice continued. "Supposedly has some weird connection with critters." "No way," Brett Cooper replied, amusement evident in his tone. "Dad would love that, a blind girl who can charm our problem horse." The boys snickered, moving closer to Emma as the group began walking again. "Hey there," Brett said, his voice suddenly beside her, artificially friendly. "I'm Brett Cooper. This is amazing, but you're missing the best part of the tour." Emma tensed, recognizing the familiar prelude to mockery. "What part is that?" "We've got this special pony that's super gentle, loves meeting visitors," Brett continued, touching her elbow. "My dad doesn't show him on the main tour, but I could take you." Warning bells rang in Emma's mind, but years at Sunshine had taught her that making a scene often made situations worse. Maybe, she reasoned, this was a genuine offer, and she'd always been drawn to the animals others overlooked. "Is it allowed?" she asked cautiously. "Totally," Brett assured her, guiding her away from the group. "I'm the owner's son, remember? Marcus, come help." Emma found herself being led away, the sound of the main tour growing distant. She counted steps and turns, mapping their deviation. "Careful here," Brett said as they rounded a corner, his voice containing poorly concealed excitement that made Emma increasingly uneasy. The air changed. They were somewhere more isolated, the sounds of the manicured farm giving way to a rawer atmosphere. Emma detected the unmistakable presence of a horse nearby, but something felt wrong. The breathing pattern was agitated, the movements in the enclosure ahead suggesting not a gentle pony, but a powerful, distressed animal. "Here we are," Brett announced too cheerfully. "Just wait till you meet Thunder." "Tornado," corrected another man's voice, older, gruffer. "And what the hell are you doing bringing visitors here, Brett? Your father would—" "Relax, Jackson," Brett interrupted. "Just having some fun. She's the blind girl from the charity tour. She talks to animals or something." Emma felt her cheeks burn with humiliation as she realized she'd walked straight into their trap. "This isn't funny," Jackson said sharply. "That's not some gentle pony. That's a wild Mustang your father paid a fortune for, and he's already put 3 handlers in the hospital." Emma froze, now fully understanding the joke. They'd brought her to an enclosure housing a dangerous, traumatized animal, expecting her to be terrified when she discovered the truth. "Don't worry, Jackson," Brett laughed. "We'll just let her say hello from outside the fence. No harm." Before Emma could protest, she felt hands pushing her forward until her fingers touched rough wooden fencing. The presence beyond the barrier was overwhelming. She could sense massive size, power, and above all, fear radiating from the animal like heat from a furnace. "What's wrong, animal fairy?" one of the boys taunted. "Can't you talk to this one?" Emma ignored them, her attention wholly captured by the creature before her. Its breathing was rapid but deep, a massive chest expanding with each breath. Its movements were controlled but explosive, hooves striking the ground with enough force to send vibrations through the earth into Emma's feet. But beneath the aggression, Emma sensed something familiar, the particular quality of fear she'd felt in so many abandoned animals at Sunshine. Not aggression for its own sake, but the desperate defense mechanism of a being that expected only pain from human contact. "You're scared," she whispered, the realization silencing the laughter behind her. "You're not angry, you're terrified." The horse's movements paused momentarily, perhaps at the unexpected gentleness in her voice. "You also feel alone, don't you?" Emma continued softly, ignoring the boys who had fallen silent. "I understand that." The Mustang's breathing changed subtly, still wary, but with a new note of curiosity. Emma heard it take a step closer to the fence, then another, its movements cautious but deliberate. Something inside Emma responded to this magnificent creature's pain. Without planning it, she began to hum, then softly sing the same Appalachian ballad that had been playing on her iPod that morning, a song about mountains and freedom, about finding your way home when all paths seem lost. The melody flowed from her like water seeking its level, filling the tense silence between human and horse. The Mustang's breathing slowed, synchronizing gradually with the rhythm of Emma's song. "Impossible," Jackson murmured as the horse took another step toward the fence. Emma continued singing, her voice gaining strength not from volume but from the pure emotion behind each note. When she felt the Mustang's breath warm against her outstretched fingers, tears sprang to her eyes behind her dark glasses. The touch, when it finally came, sent electricity through her body. The softest brush of velvety muzzle against her fingertips, hesitant but deliberate. In that moment of connection, Emma felt a recognition that transcended species, two wounded souls identifying in each other a kindred spirit. Brett's laughter had died completely, replaced by something that sounded almost like annoyance. His joke had produced not the expected fear and humiliation, but something magical he couldn't comprehend. "What's going on here?" Randall Cooper's authoritative voice shattered the moment. "Who authorized visitors in this area?" Emma felt the Mustang withdraw instantly, its fear returning at the sound of Cooper's voice. "Jackson, explain yourself," Cooper demanded. "Sir, I was just telling these young people they shouldn't be here," Jackson began. "It was my idea, Dad," Brett admitted, suddenly sounding younger. "We were just showing her. You brought an orphan, a blind orphan, near my most valuable acquisition." Cooper's voice contained a dangerous edge. "Do you have any idea of the liability, the potential damage?" Emma felt rough hands pulling her away from the fence, back toward the main group. As she was led away, she turned her face toward the enclosure one last time. "Tornado," she whispered to herself, committing the name to memory along with the sensation of that first touch. In the distance, she heard something that made Jackson pause momentarily, a soft nickering sound, gentle and almost melodic. "Well, I'll be damned," the old handler muttered. "That's the first gentle sound that horse has made since he arrived." Emma smiled slightly as they rejoined the main group, the memory of warm breath against her fingertips more valuable than all of Cooper's trophies combined. Something had passed between her and the Mustang, something that felt like a promise, and she knew with absolute certainty that this would not be their last encounter. Emma couldn't sleep that night. The memory of Tornado's breath against her fingertips replayed endlessly, a phantom sensation that lingered like a promise. She lay awake in her narrow bed at Sunshine Children's Home, listening to the rhythmic breathing of 19 other girls, her mind racing with plans that both thrilled and terrified her. By dawn, she had memorized the route to Blue Ridge Farm, 43 minutes by bus, approximately 8 miles following County Road 27, then a right turn onto the private access road marked by stone pillars. She had counted every turn during yesterday's trip, mapping the journey in her mind with the precision that had become second nature since losing her sight. The morning routine at Sunshine offered perfect cover. After breakfast, when the younger children had art therapy and the older ones were assigned to various chores, Emma slipped away during the 20-minute window when Mrs. Winters was occupied with her daily administrative call. The cane in her right hand tapped confidently along the familiar path to the service gate, rarely used and monitored only by a disinterested security camera. Outside the orphanage grounds, Emma's heart raced with unfamiliar freedom. The world beyond Sunshine's walls was a symphony of sensations. Cars rushing past on the main road, the scent of wild honeysuckle from untended hedgerows, the feel of uneven gravel beneath her feet instead of institutional linoleum. She walked with purpose, counting steps and using the sun's warmth on her face to maintain direction. The journey was arduous. Nearly 2 hours of careful navigation, pausing occasionally to confirm her bearings by listening to passing vehicles or asking the few pedestrians she encountered for basic directions, framing her questions to avoid revealing her destination. By midday, the sounds of traffic gave way to the distinctive atmosphere of Kentucky horse country, the distant whinny of thoroughbreds, the smell of freshly cut grass from manicured pastures, the particular silence of extreme wealth where even nature seemed choreographed. The imposing stone pillars marking Blue Ridge's entrance were easy to identify by touch, smooth, cold marble engraved with the farm's name. Emma followed the perimeter fence, moving cautiously away from the main entrance toward the back of the property where service vehicles came and went. Her sensitive hearing picked up the subtle sound of a section of fence that rattled slightly in the breeze, poorly repaired perhaps, or damaged. Exploring with careful fingers, she discovered a gap just wide enough for a slender 16-year-old to squeeze through. The property was vast, 200 acres according to what she'd overheard during yesterday's tour, but Emma had memorized the general layout and, more importantly, could detect Tornado's distinctive presence. His breathing carried a particular cadence, powerful lungs expanding with a rhythm unlike the meticulously trained thoroughbreds in the main stables. Moving with the practiced stealth developed through years of avoiding attention at Sunshine, Emma navigated around outbuildings and equipment sheds until she detected the now familiar sounds of Tornado's enclosure. She settled herself quietly against the outer fence, far enough away to avoid startling him but close enough for her voice to carry. "Hello again," she said softly, no louder than a gentle breeze. "I came back, just like I promised myself I would." Inside the enclosure, Tornado's movements shifted, a subtle change in his pacing that told Emma he'd detected her presence. "I don't know if you remember me from yesterday," she continued, keeping her voice even and melodic. "I'm Emma, the one who doesn't see with eyes, but feels things differently." For nearly an hour, Emma simply sat and talked, sharing stories about life at Sunshine, about the accident that had taken her parents and her sight when she was 8, about her connection to animals that the other children mockingly called fairy magic. Tornado made no approach, but his agitated movements gradually settled into a more relaxed rhythm as her voice became familiar. "Sometimes I think being blind helps me understand creatures like you," she mused. "Everyone looks at you and sees something dangerous, something to be controlled or feared. They do the same with me. See the blindness first and decide what I am before knowing who I am." A subtle nickering sound from the enclosure suggested Tornado was listening. Emma smiled and began to hum softly, the same Appalachian ballad from yesterday, its haunting melody speaking of mountains and freedom. "You're not from here, are they?" she said between verses. "They said you're from Wyoming. I've never been there, but I've read it has the widest skies in America. You must miss that space, that freedom." The sound of approaching footsteps silenced her immediately. Emma tensed, preparing excuses for her trespassing, but relaxed slightly when she recognized the distinctive gait. Jackson, the older handler from yesterday. "I thought I might find you here," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "You've got a death wish, girl. This isn't some petting zoo." Emma turned her face toward his voice. "He's not going to hurt me." "That right?" Jackson scoffed. "Tell that to Miguel, who's still wearing a cast, or Davis, who needed 27 stitches. This animal is unmanageable." "He's not unmanageable," Emma corrected gently. "He's terrified and angry. There's a difference." Jackson was silent for a long moment, and Emma could sense him studying her with the same careful assessment he probably used with difficult horses. "How'd you get all the way out here anyway?" he finally asked. "You walk from town?" Emma nodded, suddenly aware of her aching feet and parched throat. Jackson sighed deeply. "Wait here," he instructed, then walked away, his footsteps receding toward what Emma assumed was a nearby outbuilding. He returned minutes later, pressing a cool bottle of water into her hands. "Drink," he ordered. "Then you need to leave before someone besides me finds you here." Emma drank gratefully, but made no move to leave. "I'm helping him," she said with quiet conviction. "Helping?" Jackson's laugh held no humor. "Girl, that horse is worth more than most houses. Mr. Cooper didn't spend a small fortune to have some orphan kid help him." "What did Mr. Cooper spend a fortune for then?" Emma challenged. "To break him? To make him forget what freedom feels like?" The question hung in the air between them. Emma heard Jackson shift his weight, the subtle creak of well-worn leather boots betraying his discomfort. "I've worked with horses for 40 years, he finally said, his voice lower, almost confessional. "Started as a stable boy when I was younger than you. I've seen every method there is for turning wild horses into show champions, some gentler than others." "And what does Mr. Cooper prefer?" Emma asked, already knowing the answer. "Results," Jackson said flatly. "Fast ones." The conversation paused as Tornado moved closer to the fence where they sat, his curiosity seemingly piqued by their voices. "Look at that," Jackson murmured. "He's never approached when anyone else was present." "He's listening," Emma explained. "Not just to our words, but to how we feel. Animals always know." Jackson exhaled slowly. "You should still leave. If Cooper finds you here—" "I'll come back tomorrow," Emma interrupted. "And the day after." "Why?" Jackson asked, genuine puzzlement in his voice. "Why risk trouble for a horse you barely know?" Emma turned her face toward Tornado's enclosure, a slight smile touching her lips. "Because I recognize something in him, and I think he recognized something in me too." Jackson was silent for a long moment, then sighed with the resignation of someone who recognized a losing battle. "Be here at 2 tomorrow. The main staff will be at the training rings on the north side. I'll bring some carrots. Proper ones from the kitchen, not those dried pellets they've been trying to tempt him with." Emma's smile widened. "Thank you, Mr. Jackson." "Just Jackson," he corrected, helping her to her feet. "And don't thank me yet. I could lose my job of 25 years for this foolishness." As Jackson led her toward a service gate that would give her easier access back to the main road, Emma asked the question that had been bothering her since yesterday. "Why did Mr. Cooper buy Tornado if he's so difficult?" Jackson's response was measured, thoughtful. "Because he's perfect, genetically speaking. Pure Mustang bloodlines, uncontaminated by selective breeding. Cooper wants to introduce that wildness back into his racing stock, create something unprecedented." He paused. "But first, the wildness has to be controlled, channeled." "Broken," Emma said softly. "That's the traditional term," Jackson acknowledged. "Though we're supposed to say gentled now." "There's nothing gentle about breaking someone's spirit," Emma replied. The next day, Emma returned as promised, slipping through the service gate that Jackson had deliberately left unlatched. He was waiting with a small bag of fresh carrots and a troubled expression. "Cooper's brought in a specialist," he explained as they walked toward Tornado's enclosure. "Mark Daniels has a reputation for handling problem horses. The way Jackson emphasized those words told Emma everything she needed to know. He hurts them? Gets results, Jackson replied, echoing his description of Cooper's preferences. Uses methods most modern trainers abandoned years ago. Cooper's given him a month to make progress with Tornado. Or what? Emma asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Jackson's silence was answer enough. The economics of championship breeding left no room for sentimentality. An unmanageable stallion, no matter how genetically valuable, was a liability. Over the following days, a pattern emerged. Emma would arrive at 2. Jackson would meet her with treats for Tornado and updates on Daniel's lack of progress, then leave her alone with the Mustang while he kept watch for other staff. Emma's approach never varied. She would sit quietly by the fence, talking softly, singing occasionally, and leaving small offerings just within Tornado's reach. The massive black horse gradually began to accept her presence, approaching closer each day, though still maintaining a cautious distance. On the 7th day, Emma brought her iPod and played the folk songs her mother had loved, telling Tornado stories about each melody. "This one's about a wild stallion who chose freedom over capture," she explained. "My mom said it was based on a real horse from the 1800s who jumped off a cliff rather than be taken from his herd." Tornado's ears pricked forward at the story, and he approached closer than ever before, huffing soft breaths that ruffled Emma's hair over the fence. "You understand, don't you?" she whispered. "What it means to lose everything in an instant." From his observation point, Jackson watched with growing amazement as the horse that had sent 3 experienced handlers to the hospital gently accepted a carrot from the blind girl's outstretched palm, their connection deepening in ways that defied conventional training wisdom. What none of them realized was that Sarah Johnson, Emma's music teacher at Sunshine, who had noticed her repeated absences, had followed her that day. Hidden behind a storage shed, Sarah watched in stunned silence as the fearsome Mustang everyone at the orphanage had heard about through local gossip behaved with lamb-like gentleness around her student. When her phone buzzed in her pocket, Sarah instinctively pulled it out to silence it, then paused, looking at the scene before her with new understanding. Slowly, carefully, she raised the phone and began to record. "You won't believe this, Will," she whispered later that evening, showing the video to Dr. William Hayes, a retired veterinarian and longtime friend who had often provided free care for the orphanage's occasional rescue animals. "This is the Mustang everyone's talking about, the one that nearly killed 3 handlers at Blue Ridge." Dr. Hayes watched the video with professional interest that quickly transformed into astonishment. "That's not possible," he murmured as the footage showed Tornado gently taking food from Emma's hand. "That horse should be in a complete flight or fight response with any human contact after what he's been through." "Emma's always had a way with animals," Sarah explained. "But this is different. I don't know what this is. This," Dr. Hayes said solemnly, "is exactly what I spent 40 years trying to explain to my colleagues, that animals respond to emotional states in ways we barely understand." He looked up from the phone, eyes suddenly sharp. "Sarah, this needs to be documented properly. Not just for Emma's sake, but for changing how we approach traumatized animals." "Will, I promised I'd only show you," Sarah protested. "If the orphanage finds out she's been sneaking away—" "I understand your concern," Dr. Hayes nodded. "But this could be important beyond just one girl and one horse. Let me share it with just a few trusted colleagues, experts in equine behavior who would appreciate the significance." What neither of them anticipated was how quickly the video would spread beyond that small circle of professionals, jumping to social media groups dedicated to animal welfare, horse rescue, and eventually, local community forums where the connection was made to Cooper's wild Mustang and the blind orphan girl. Meanwhile, Emma continued her daily visits, unaware of the growing interest in her unique bond with Tornado. When Mark Daniels returned with harsher equipment after a week away at another job, he found the Mustang's enclosure empty. When Emma heard what Daniels was planning next, Jackson later explained to Sarah, after discovering her knowledge of the situation, "I couldn't stand by and do nothing. So I moved Tornado to the old Kingston stable at the back property, unused since Cooper's father's time. There, away from prying eyes and Daniel's methods, Emma spends hours each day with him. developing their own language of touch, sound, and presence. Sarah watched the video on her phone again that night, the one that was now spreading rapidly through Kentucky's tight-knit equestrian community. In it, Emma's gentle hands moved over Tornado's powerful body, identifying each scar, each sensitive area, while whispering words of comfort that seemed to melt the Mustang's defenses. "No one has ever waited for me." Emma's voice came clearly through the recording, her fingers trembling as they touched Tornado's rain-soaked mane. "But I will wait for you as long as necessary." Words that were already reaching people Sarah never intended, changing perceptions and challenging assumptions with every new share. July arrived in Kentucky with relentless heat that seemed to press down on Blue Ridge Farm like a physical weight. The main stable's tin roof popped and creaked under the scorching sun, while horses in the pastures sought whatever shade they could find. For Randall Cooper, however, the heat was irrelevant. His annual summer auction was just 3 days away, and nothing short of an apocalypse would distract him from ensuring every detail was perfect. Emma felt the tension in the air as she made her way along the now familiar path to Tornado's enclosure. 2 weeks of daily visits had refined her mental map of Blue Ridge Farm, to the point where she moved with surprising confidence across the sprawling property. The auction preparations provided perfect cover. Staff members were too busy polishing tack, grooming sale horses, and preparing the presentation arena to notice a slender girl slipping quietly through the back areas. When she reached Tornado's enclosure, Emma paused, sensing something different in the atmosphere. The Mustang's usual rhythmic pacing was absent, replaced by an unnerving stillness. "Tornado?" she called softly, her voice barely carrying over the fence. A soft nickering answered her, closer than she expected. He was already at the fence, waiting for her. Emma's heart quickened. After days of gradual approaches and careful negotiations of space, this immediate presence represented a breakthrough. She swallowed hard, feeling a moment of decision hovering between them. "I think today's the day," she whispered, more to herself than to the horse. With trembling fingers, Emma unlatched the gate and stepped inside the enclosure for the first time. The space immediately felt different, more intimate, more dangerous. No barrier remained between her and the powerful creature that had sent 3 grown men to the hospital. "I'm here," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I trust you." Tornado shifted his weight, powerful hooves stirring the dust. Emma could sense his massive presence circling her, not aggressively, but with wary curiosity. She settled herself cross-legged in the center of the enclosure, making herself small and unthreatening. "I'll just sit here," she explained, as if Tornado understood every word. "You can come closer when you're ready. Or not. It's your choice." From behind a storage shed 50 yards away, Sarah Johnson watched with her heart in her throat. She'd followed Emma again, concerned about her students' increasingly frequent absences from the orphanage. What she witnessed now made her simultaneously terrified and awestruck. She raised her phone with shaking hands, recording what no rational person would believe without evidence. Inside the enclosure, Emma began to sing, a gentle Appalachian ballad about mountains standing strong through centuries of storms. The melody floated through the hot afternoon air like a tangible thing, filling the space between girl and horse. Tornado's movements changed in response to her voice. His circling pattern tightened gradually, each revolution bringing him slightly closer to the center where Emma sat. His ears flicked forward, catching every note, every subtle change in her breathing. "My mother used to sing this to me," Emma explained between verses. She said mountains and horses share the same spirit, wild things that humans try to claim but never truly possess. The Mustang snorted softly, as if considering her words. Emma continued talking, her voice maintaining the same melodic quality whether singing or speaking. "I remember colors, you know, from before the accident. The blue of Kentucky sky, the green of summer grass." She smiled. "They told me you're completely black, but I bet you have hidden colors. Maybe a star on your forehead, or a white sock that people don't notice at first." Tornado took another step closer, his curiosity seemingly piqued by this strange human who made no demands, who simply occupied space differently than others he had encountered. Sarah, still filming, barely breathed as she watched the deadly stallion draw nearer to Emma with each passing minute. She nearly gasped aloud when Tornado finally stopped his circling and stood directly before the seated girl. "I can feel you there," Emma said softly. "You're trying to decide if I'm a threat." She slowly extended her hand, palm up, offering connection but not demanding it. "I'm not. I promise I'm not." For long moments, horse and girl remained frozen in a tableau of potential, his massive power hovering over her vulnerable smallness. Then, with deliberate gentleness that belied his fearsome reputation, Tornado lowered his head and touched his muzzle to Emma's outstretched fingers. The contact was electric, a bridge formed between two beings separated by species but united by parallel experiences of trauma and isolation. Emma's face, usually composed, crumpled with emotion. Tears slid silently from beneath her dark glasses as Tornado allowed her fingers to trace the contours of his face. "You're beautiful," she whispered, her voice breaking. "So beautiful and so misunderstood." Sarah's own eyes blurred with tears as she continued filming. The intimacy of the moment felt almost too private to witness, yet too important not to document. When her phone vibrated with an incoming call, she hastily silenced it, unwilling to disrupt the miracle unfolding before her. Inside the enclosure, the connection deepened as Tornado, seemingly satisfied with his assessment of Emma, took another step forward. To Sarah's astonishment, the enormous horse gradually lowered himself, folding his legs beneath him until his head rested gently in Emma's lap. Emma's surprise was evident in her sudden intake of breath, but her hands remained steady as they stroked the Mustang's powerful neck. "It's okay," she murmured through her tears. "It's okay now. I've got you." Tornado released a deep sigh, his entire body relaxing as Emma's fingers found the sensitive spot behind his ears. For a creature that had known only fear and defensive aggression since his violent capture, this surrender represented a profound transformation. "Vou te proteger," Emma promised in a whisper, unconsciously slipping into the Portuguese her mother had sometimes used for tender moments. "Ninguém mais vai te machucar." Then, returning to English, "I'll protect you. No one will hurt you anymore." The tears that fell from Emma's cheeks landed on Tornado's sleek coat, small droplets of shared understanding that seemed to seal their unspoken pact. Sarah finally lowered her phone, the battery warning flashing. She had captured enough, perhaps too much. As she carefully backed away, her mind raced with questions about what to do with this extraordinary footage. Later that evening, Sarah sat across from Dr. William Hayes in his modest living room, the video playing on his larger tablet screen. "In 50 years treating horses," Hayes murmured, shaking his head in disbelief, "I've never seen anything like this." He looked up at Sarah, his weathered face intense. "This isn't just remarkable, Sarah. This is paradigm shifting." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, accepting the cup of tea he offered. "The entire equestrian industry operates on dominance principles, breaking horses to accept human control." Hayes gestured toward the paused video showing Tornado resting his head in Emma's lap. "This girl has achieved in 2 weeks what professional trainers couldn't accomplish with force in months. She's always had a way with animals," Sarah acknowledged. "But this feels different, more significant somehow." "It is." Hayes leaned forward earnestly. "Sarah, this approach could revolutionize how we handle traumatized animals. Not just horses, any creature that's experienced human cruelty." "Will, I promised I'd only show you," Sarah reminded him, sudden anxiety creeping into her voice. "If Mrs. Winters discovers Emma's been sneaking away." "I understand your concern," Hayes nodded. "But this could be important beyond just one girl and one horse. Let me share it with just a few trusted colleagues, experts in equine behavior who would appreciate the significance." Sarah hesitated, torn between protecting her student and recognizing the potential impact of what she'd witnessed. "Just a few," she finally agreed. "People you personally trust. Neither of them could have anticipated how quickly things would escalate from that point. The next afternoon, Jackson met Emma at the service gate with unusual urgency in his movements. "Daniels is back," he explained tersely as they hurried toward Tornado's enclosure. "With equipment I haven't seen used on horses since the 80s. "What kind of equipment?" Emma asked, dread settling in her stomach. "The kind designed to break a horse's will, not earn his trust." Jackson's voice was grim. "Cooper's getting impatient. The auction's tomorrow and he wants to announce Tornado as his new breeding prospect, preferably with some demonstration of control." "But Tornado isn't ready for that," Emma protested. "He's just beginning to trust. Forcing him now would destroy everything." "Cooper doesn't care about trust," Jackson replied. "He cares about investment return." When they reached the enclosure, Emma sensed Tornado's agitation immediately. The Mustang paced nervously, his earlier calm replaced by alert wariness. "He knows something's wrong," Emma said softly. "He can feel the change in the farm's energy." Jackson made a decision then, one that would likely cost him his job of 25 years. "We need to move him. Tonight." "Move him where?" Emma asked. "There's an old stable on the back property. Kingston Stable, from Cooper's father's time. Hasn't been used in years." Jackson's voice lowered conspiratorially. "I can bring him there after evening feed when everyone's focused on final auction preparations." That night, under cover of darkness and auction chaos, Jackson led Tornado through rarely used back trails to the abandoned Kingston Stable. The Mustang followed with surprising willingness, perhaps sensing that this secretive journey was for his protection. Emma waited inside the dusty old structure, her presence a beacon of reassurance for the nervous horse. The stable was perfect, isolated enough to avoid casual discovery, yet structurally sound despite years of neglect. Its location at the far edge of the Blue Ridge property, backed by dense woodland, provided natural concealment. "No one comes here anymore," Jackson explained as he settled Tornado into the largest stall. "Cooper thinks this place is outdated. Too small, too rustic for his operation." In this hidden sanctuary, Emma's work with Tornado deepened. She spent hours each day with him, her sensitive fingers learning every inch of his powerful body, identifying each scar, each sensitive area, developing a tactile map of his experiences and responses. "This one's from a wire fence, isn't it?" she asked, fingers tracing a thin line along his flank. Tornado's skin twitched in acknowledgement. "And this one's newer. From the capture, I think." As Emma cataloged his physical traumas, she also addressed the deeper, invisible wounds. Her hands developed a language that communicated safety, respect, and understanding. When she found particularly painful memories embedded in his muscles, she would sing softly, her voice creating a sound barrier against the echoes of past violence. What none of them realized was that Dr. Hayes had indeed shared Sarah's video, but its impact had proven far greater than anticipated. From his small circle of trusted colleagues, the footage spread to wider equestrian forums, animal behavior specialists, and eventually to local Kentucky horse enthusiasts, who immediately recognized Blue Ridge Farm and the wild Mustang that had been the subject of stable gossip for weeks. By the morning of the auction, the video had reached the Lexington Herald, whose features editor immediately recognized its potential. The paper published a front-page article titled "The Blind Enchantress and the Untamable Mustang," featuring still images from Sarah's video that captured the extraordinary moment of Tornado resting his head in Emma's lap. When Cooper discovered the empty enclosure and the rapidly spreading story, his fury was apocalyptic. He fired Jackson on the spot, threatened to sue the orphanage for trespassing, and ordered his security team to search every inch of the property for the missing horse. "When I find that animal," he raged to his auction staff, "it's being moved to our high-security facility in Versailles. No visitors, no exceptions." That evening, as news of Jackson's firing spread through the Blue Ridge staff, Emma made one final visit to the Kingston stable. Her heart was heavy with the knowledge that their sanctuary had a rapidly closing window of safety. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted to Tornado, her arms wrapped around his powerful neck. "But I promise I'll find a way back to you." The Mustang pressed his head against her chest, his breath warm and steady against her collarbone. This closeness, this trust, had been earned through patience and respect rather than dominance and control. Neither Emma nor Tornado noticed the elderly figure watching from the stable doorway until he spoke. "You have a gift, child," said Dr. Hayes, his voice gentle but firm. "And gifts like this cannot be wasted." Emma turned toward the unfamiliar voice, instinctively maintaining physical contact with Tornado. "Who are you?" "A friend," Hayes replied simply. "Someone who believes what you've accomplished here matters more than you know." With tears in her eyes, Emma gave Tornado one final embrace, whispering promises of return against his velvety ear. What she couldn't know was that Dr. Hayes had already activated a network of former horse breeders, all discontented with Cooper's methods, to document the extraordinary relationship between her and the Mustang, creating evidence for a battle that was only beginning to take shape. "Doctor." Hayes's words lingered in the still air of the Kingston stable as he led Emma reluctantly away from Tornado. "What you've started here can't end now," he assured her, his weathered hand gentle on her shoulder. "But we need to be strategic about what comes next." The following morning, Emma returned to Sunshine Children's Home to find Mrs. Winters waiting in the entrance hall, her sensible shoes tapping an impatient rhythm against the linoleum. The director's breathing carried the tight pattern of suppressed anger that Emma had learned to recognize years ago. "My office. Now." The words fell like stones in the quiet hallway. Emma followed the familiar path, her cane tapping lightly as a counterpoint to Mrs. Winters's sharp footsteps. Inside the office, the scent of lemon furniture polish couldn't mask the tension. "Would you care to explain this?" Mrs. Winters asked, the rustle of newspaper accompanying her words. "I can't see what you're holding," Emma replied quietly. "Don't be clever, Emma." The director's voice sharpened. "It's today's Lexington Herald, with a rather remarkable front-page story about a blind orphan from Sunshine forming a magical bond with Randall Cooper's prize Mustang. The same Randall Cooper who called me at 6 this morning threatening to sue this institution for trespassing, endangerment, and something called interference with valuable livestock." Emma's hands tightened around her cane. "Is Tornado okay?" "Tornado?" Mrs. Winters' incredulity was palpable. "You're worried about the horse? Emma, you've put this entire orphanage at risk. Mr. Cooper is on the state funding committee that approves our annual budget. One word from him could close our doors permanently." "I didn't mean to cause trouble," Emma said, her voice small but steady. "I just wanted to help him." "Help him?" Mrs. Winters sighed heavily, her chair creaking as she leaned back. "Emma, you're 16, blind, with no resources or family. The idea that you could help a wild Mustang worth hundreds of thousands of dollars is precisely the kind of fantasy I've tried to protect you from." Across town at Blue Ridge Farm, Randall Cooper paced his mahogany-paneled office while 3 attorneys in expensive suits took notes. The morning sunlight gleamed off trophies and ribbons lining the walls, testaments to decades of equestrian dominance. "I want maximum damages," Cooper insisted, his normally composed demeanor fractured by rage. "That orphanage has been a charity case long enough. Their negligence could have cost me $1 million investment." "Sir," ventured the youngest attorney, "the publicity angle is concerning. The Herald story is gaining traction online. The narrative of a blind orphan connecting with a wild horse has strong emotional appeal." Cooper dismissed this with a sharp gesture. "I don't care about emotional appeal. I care about property rights. That Mustang represents a genetic goldmine for my breeding program." Meanwhile, in a spacious stall in Cooper's high-security facility 10 miles away, Tornado paced restlessly. The new environment, clinical, sterile, surveilled, heightened his anxiety. Every approaching footstep triggered his defensive instincts, his powerful body coiled with tension. The scent of Emma, sunshine, lavender soap, and something uniquely her, had faded from his awareness, replaced by unfamiliar handlers whose fear he could smell. When a groom attempted to deliver water, Tornado's reaction was explosive, rearing, striking out with precision born of terror rather than aggression. The man barely escaped, the water bucket clattering against the concrete floor. "He won't eat or drink," reported the facility manager to Cooper that afternoon. "3 handlers have already refused to enter his stall. Sir, I've never seen behavior this extreme, even in newly captured Mustangs." Cooper's response was cold. "Then call Daniels back. Tell him to use whatever methods necessary." At Sunshine Children's Home, Emma sat alone in the dormitory, forbidden from leaving the grounds for the foreseeable future. Through the open window, she could hear younger children playing in the yard, their laughter a stark contrast to her isolation. Her fingers traced the edge of her iPod, but she couldn't bring herself to play the songs she'd shared with Tornado. The door opened with a gentle creak. "Emma?" Sarah Johnson's voice carried a mixture of concern and hesitation. "May I come in?" Emma nodded, her face turned toward the window. "I owe you an explanation," Sarah said, settling onto the bed beside her. "The video. I only meant to show Dr. Hayes. I never imagined it would spread so quickly." "The video?" Emma turned, confusion evident behind her dark glasses. Sarah explained about following her to Blue Ridge, recording her interaction with Tornado, sharing it with Hayes. "I was worried about you at first, but then I saw something miraculous, something that needed to be documented. Mrs. Winters says Mr. Cooper is going to sue the orphanage," Emma said, her voice trembling slightly. "Because of me." "No," Sarah's response was firm. "Because Randall Cooper can't stand losing control of his horses or his narrative." She took Emma's hand. "But you should know, not everyone is on his side." That evening, Sarah introduced Emma to Megan Patterson, a former Sunshine music student who had become a civil rights attorney with a small practice in Lexington. In the quiet of the orphanage's modest library, Megan listened intently as Emma described her experiences with Tornado. "When you say you recognized something in him," Megan asked, her voice carrying the slight drawl of Eastern Kentucky, "what exactly do you mean?" Emma considered carefully. "Trauma leaves echoes. I can feel them in animals, especially. Tornado wasn't born dangerous. His fear made him dangerous, just like my blindness made others see me as helpless." Megan's pen scratched against paper as she took notes. "That's a powerful insight, Emma, and potentially important legally." "Legally?" Emma leaned forward. "Can you help me see him again?" "I'm not sure yet," Megan admitted. "Animal law is complicated. Horses are legally property in Kentucky, with some of the weakest protection statutes in the country. But," she added, her voice warming with determination, "there might be angles worth exploring." Back at Blue Ridge, Tornado's condition deteriorated rapidly. Separated from the one human who had broken through his defenses, the Mustang retreated into primitive survival instincts. He refused food, drank minimally, and reacted with increasing aggression to any approach. His magnificent body, once rippling with health, began showing signs of stress: dull coat, prominent ribs, eyes wild with constant vigilance. Word of his situation spread through the tight-knit community of stable hands, grooms, and exercise riders. Jackson, now unemployed after 25 years at Blue Ridge, became an unexpected conduit for information as former colleagues sought him out. "Cooper's ruining that horse," confided a groom who risked his job to visit Jackson's modest apartment. "Everyone can see it, but nobody can say anything." "That blind girl was the only one who got through to him," added another. "Now Daniels is talking about using twitches and hobbles, old-school methods nobody uses anymore." These conversations planted seeds that would grow into something Cooper never anticipated, a community awakening to question practices long accepted as necessary in the pursuit of equestrian excellence. At Sunshine, Emma's isolation deepened when Mrs. Winters began discussing alternative placement options. "Perhaps the School for the Blind in Louisville would be more appropriate," the director suggested during a tense meeting with Emma and Sarah. "They have specialized resources we simply can't provide here." The real message was clear. Emma had become a liability. News of Tornado and Emma's separation continued spreading through unlikely channels. Dr. Hayes shared the video with veterinary colleagues who passed it to students, who shared it with riding instructors, who showed it to clients. Within days, the story reached Dave Collins, a nationally known television personality who had grown up in a small Kentucky town before finding fame in New York. When Collins dedicated 4 minutes of his primetime show to the remarkable story emerging from Kentucky horse country, what had been local interest exploded into national conversation. When a blind teenager accomplishes in 2 weeks what professional trainers couldn't do in months, Collins said to millions of viewers, perhaps it's time we reconsider what we think we know about horses, about communication, and about who truly deserves the label disabled. The segment featured edited portions of Sarah's video, expert commentary from equine behaviorists, and a brief history of Randall Cooper's controversial training methods. By morning, social media had transformed Blind Enchantress and Free Tornado into trending topics. In Lexington, the community response was immediate and divided. Established horse families publicly supported Cooper, releasing statements about the complexities of professional horse training that amateurs cannot understand. But a surprising counter-movement emerged from the working-class backbone of Kentucky's equestrian world: the grooms, exercise riders, farriers, and small stable owners who witnessed daily the consequences of prioritizing results over welfare. "I've seen what happens when horses are viewed as commodities," testified one retired trainer at an impromptu community meeting held in a local church. "What that girl did wasn't magic. It was respect, something this industry could use more of." Dr. Hayes organized a petition signed by over 40 veterinarians and equine specialists, arguing that Emma's methods represented a significant advancement in humane training approaches for traumatized animals. The document circulated through professional channels, gathering momentum among progressive elements in the traditionally conservative horse world. On the 7th day of their separation, Emma received an unexpected visitor at Sunshine. Brett Cooper arrived in his luxury sports car, his usual arrogance dimmed by obvious discomfort. "I came to apologize," he said awkwardly as they sat in the visitor's lounge, the silence between his sentences heavy with unspoken thoughts. "That first day, the joke with Tornado, it was my idea. I thought it would be funny to scare you." Emma's face remained impassive behind her dark glasses. "But it didn't work out that way." "No," Brett admitted. "What happened instead was... I don't know how to explain it, but I've never seen anything like it before or since." "How is he?" Emma asked, her voice softening with genuine concern. Brett hesitated. "Not good. He stopped eating almost entirely. One of the night security guards told me he paces constantly, looking for something or someone." "He's looking for freedom," Emma said quietly, "or at least a moment of peace. My father's obsessed with winning this," Brett continued, his voice lowering. "He never loses. Not lawsuits, not races, not arguments. It's like he physically can't accept defeat." As Brett left, Sarah found Emma sitting alone, her expression thoughtful. "What did young Mr. Cooper want?" "To ease his conscience, I think," Emma replied. "But he told me something important. Tornado is giving up." That night, Emma sat by her dormitory window, the radio from the common room drifting up through the evening air. The local station was discussing her story, callers phoning in with passionate opinions about Cooper, about animal rights, about the miracle captured on video. "This girl has shown us something profound," said one caller, his voice cracking with emotion. "When someone without sight connects with a creature everyone else fears, maybe the rest of us are the ones who are truly blind." Emma listened, tears sliding silently beneath her dark glasses, as the conversation about her and Tornado expanded beyond anything she could have imagined. What had begun as a private connection between two wounded souls had somehow touched something deeper in the community. Something about power and vulnerability, about seeing and being seen, about whose voice deserves to be heard. Miles away, in his sterile stall, Tornado stood motionless for the first time in days, his ears pricked toward some distant sound only he could hear. As if somewhere, beyond walls and fences and human constraints, he sensed a possibility that had seemed lost. The sound of Emma's voice carrying through memories, a promise of return, not forgotten. The next morning, Megan Patterson arrived at Sunshine with news that silenced the crowded common room. "The judge, Richard Montgomery, has agreed to review the case," she announced to the gathered group, her expression simultaneously triumphant and cautious. "But you need to understand what we're facing. Randall Cooper donated the new county courthouse, sponsors half the equestrian events in the state, and has never in 30 years of business lost a legal battle in Kentucky." Megan's words hung in the air of Sunshine's common room, settling like dust after an explosion. Emma sat perfectly still, fingers tracing the worn fabric of her chair's armrest, feeling the gravity of what they were about to undertake. "So what you're saying," Sarah clarified, breaking the silence, "is that we're going up against the most powerful man in the county with essentially no precedent on our side." "I'm saying it won't be easy," Megan replied, her leather portfolio making a soft sound as she opened it. "But sometimes the cases worth fighting are the ones nobody's fought before." The morning of the preliminary hearing arrived with the particular crispness of early Kentucky autumn. Emma stood in her dormitory room as Sarah helped her prepare, the soft rustle of fabric filling the space between their anxious breaths. "This dress feels too formal," Emma said, fingers exploring the unfamiliar cotton blend. "It's perfect," Sarah assured her, adjusting the collar. "Simple, respectful, but not trying too hard. First impressions matter, especially with Judge Montgomery." The courthouse loomed like a cathedral of justice, its marble steps crawling with reporters and onlookers drawn by the unusual case. Emma felt the vibrations of their voices through the soles of her shoes as Megan guided her carefully up the steps, Sarah following close behind. "Channel 7, can we get a statement?" "Emma, over here. Is it true the horse kneeled before you?" The questions bombarded them from all sides. Emma kept her face neutral behind her dark glasses, focusing on the rhythm of Megan's footsteps leading her forward. Inside, the courtroom smelled of polished wood, leather-bound books, and the subtle cologne that seemed universal among men of authority. The acoustics changed as they entered, sounds becoming both sharper and somehow more distant, bouncing off high ceilings and wood-paneled walls. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Richard Montgomery," announced the bailiff. Emma stood with the others, feeling the collective shift of energy as the judge entered. His footsteps were measured, deliberate, the walk of a man accustomed to being waited for. "Be seated," he instructed, his voice carrying the particular timbre of Eastern Kentucky aristocracy, old tobacco money, and generations of unquestioned authority. "This preliminary hearing in the matter of Cooper versus Sunshine Children's Home is now in session." Paper rustled as the judge reviewed documents before him. "I'll be frank," he said finally. "This is an unusual case raising questions our county has not previously addressed. Mr. Cooper claims trespassing, potential endangerment of a minor, and interference with valuable property. The respondent suggests that, among other defenses, the well-being of the animal in question should be considered." Emma listened intently, registering the careful neutrality in Montgomery's tone, a practiced impartiality that nonetheless hinted at skepticism. Cooper's legal team presented first, their arguments a seamless blend of property rights, liability concerns, and economic implications. The lead attorney, Harrison Wells, moved through the courtroom with confidence born of countless victories. "Your Honor, Tornado is not merely a horse. He's a genetic specimen of extraordinary value, representing an investment exceeding 6 figures, with potential breeding revenue in the millions," Wells explained, his voice carrying the polished resonance of expensive education. "Mr. Cooper's expertise in equestrian matters spans 5 generations. To suggest that an untrained minor, particularly one with significant physical limitations, should override his judgment regarding animal management is not only absurd, but potentially creates a dangerous precedent." Judge Montgomery interrupted. "Counsel, I'd like clarity on one point. What specifically does Mr. Cooper allege was damaged by Miss Sullivan's interactions with the animal?" Wells hesitated fractionally. "Your Honor, the animal's training regimen was disrupted. Professional handlers had established a protocol that the defendant's unauthorized interactions undermined." "The same protocol that had failed for weeks?" Megan interjected, earning a stern glance from the judge. "You'll have your turn, counselor," Montgomery admonished. though Emma detected a subtle note of interest in his voice. When Emma's time to testify came, the courtroom fell into a hush that felt almost physical. Megan guided her to the witness stand, the wooden chair creaking slightly as she took her seat. "Miss Sullivan," began Judge Montgomery, his voice softening almost imperceptibly, "would you please explain in your own words your interactions with the horse known as Tornado?" Emma took a deep breath, centering herself. "Your Honor, I first met Tornado during a school trip to Blue Ridge Farm. Brett Cooper and some employees thought it would be funny to bring the blind girl to a dangerous horse." She paused, letting the cruelty of this sink in. "But something unexpected happened. Instead of being frightened, I recognized what others didn't see. Tornado wasn't wild or vicious. He was terrified." "And how did you determine this without visual cues?" the judge asked, genuine curiosity in his question. "The same way I navigate the world, Your Honor. Through sound, through feeling, through paying attention to what others overlook." Emma's voice strengthened. His breathing pattern, the way his hooves struck the ground, these told me he was defending himself, not attacking. There's a difference between aggression and fear response that most people miss. For the next 20 minutes, Emma described her subsequent visits, the gradual building of trust, the breakthrough moments. The courtroom remained utterly silent, captivated by her clear, thoughtful testimony. Cooper's attorney approached for cross-examination, his expensive shoes making soft impressions in the carpet. "Miss Sullivan, aren't you simply projecting human emotions onto an animal? Isn't it possible that your interpretation of this horse's behavior is colored by your own emotional needs?" Emma turned toward his voice, her expression calm. "Perhaps the problem is that you're projecting human emotions like greed and dominance into a relationship that should be based on mutual respect. Animals don't lie about their feelings, Mr. Wells. Unlike people, they have no reason to pretend." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Montgomery tapped his gavel once, lightly. When Dr. Hayes took the stand, he brought 50 years of veterinary expertise and the gravitas of academic credentials. His testimony methodically dismantled the notion that Emma's approach was mere sentimentality. "The video evidence shows classic signs of trust building that we in behavioral veterinary medicine have documented extensively," he explained, referencing studies on trauma response in horses. "What's remarkable isn't just that Miss Sullivan achieved connection with this animal, but how quickly traditional barriers dissolved in her presence." Cooper sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, his jawline rigid with controlled anger as Hayes continued. Beside him, Brett shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his father's gaze. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted dramatically when Jackson entered, his weathered cowboy hat in hand, nervous determination evident in his posture. Emma recognized his footsteps immediately, the slight unevenness from an old rodeo injury, the measured pace of someone who'd spent decades moving cautiously around powerful animals. "Mr. Jackson," Megan began after he was sworn in, "how long did you work at Blue Ridge Farm?" 25 years and 3 months, ma'am," he replied, his voice carrying the rough texture of a lifetime outdoors. "And during that time, what methods did you observe regarding horses that presented training challenges?" Jackson cleared his throat. "Mr. Cooper demands results. Horses that don't perform are recycled. That's the term used internally." "Could you clarify what recycled means in this context?" Megan pressed. "Sold at auction usually, but not the public auctions where prices are monitored." Jackson's voice lowered. "There are buyers who don't ask questions about injuries or temperament. They pay cash, and the horses disappear." Cooper surged halfway from his chair before his attorney's hand restrained him. Emma could hear his breathing change, faster, shallower, the respiration pattern of someone barely containing rage. "Your Honor, this is outrageous slander from a disgruntled former employee," Wells protested. "I have documentation," Jackson countered, reaching into his worn leather satchel. "Transfer records for 36 horses in the last 5 years, none with destination notes. Veterinary records showing stress injuries consistent with excessive training methods. And this, He produced a final document, a directive regarding Miguel Sanchez, a handler who questioned training methods and found himself reported to immigration authorities the following week. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Montgomery's gavel came down with authority this time. "Order," he commanded, then addressed Cooper's attorneys. "Counsel, did you have prior knowledge of these documents?" The slight hesitation in Wells' response was damning. "We were aware Mr. Jackson might make certain claims, Your Honor." As the afternoon stretched on, expert witnesses from Cooper's side testified to the value of Tornado, the risks of amateur handling, and the established protocols for training wild Mustangs. Each spoke with professional confidence, though Emma noticed subtle differences in their conviction. Some truly believed in traditional methods, while others seemed to be reciting industry standards they themselves questioned. By late afternoon, the courtroom felt heavy with revealed truths and shifting perspectives. Judge Montgomery reviewed his notes, the soft turning of pages audible in the expectant silence. "This case presents complexities beyond simple property claims," he finally announced. "Before making any ruling, I believe a practical demonstration is in order." He looked directly at Emma. "Miss Sullivan, would you be willing to demonstrate your connection with this horse under controlled conditions, to show this court exactly what occurs between you and this animal?" Emma's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. "Yes, Your Honor." "And Mr. Cooper, would you permit this demonstration with appropriate safety measures in place?" Cooper conferred briefly with his attorneys. "We have no objection, assuming neutral experts are present to interpret what actually occurs, rather than what people might wish to see." Judge Montgomery nodded. "Then it's settled. Tomorrow at 10, we will reconvene at the municipal stables where Tornado is currently housed. Miss Sullivan will have 1 hour to demonstrate this alleged connection. If she fails, the case will be dismissed, and she will be permanently enjoined from approaching the animal again." As the courtroom began to empty, a reporter approached Emma at the courthouse steps. "Miss Sullivan, are you afraid of tomorrow's test? This horse has injured professional handlers. Aren't you concerned for your safety?" Emma turned toward the reporter's voice, her expression serene despite the butterflies in her stomach. "It's not a test for me," she replied quietly. "It's a test for all of you, to see if you can perceive with something beyond your eyes." Across town, Randall Cooper stood in Blue Ridge Farm's trophy room, phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care what it takes," he instructed the security manager at the municipal stables. "I want that horse in the worst possible mood by tomorrow morning. Nothing that leaves marks. Just make sure he's agitated, confused, and defensive. That blind girl needs to learn what happens when you challenge a Cooper in Kentucky." Dawn broke over Lexington with a watercolor palette of amber and rose, but the beauty was lost on the hundreds of people already gathering at the municipal stables. By 7 o'clock, a makeshift community had formed. Families with children on shoulders, elderly couples in folding chairs, reporters with satellite trucks, and horse enthusiasts debating in hushed, passionate clusters. The air hummed with anticipation, charged like the atmosphere before a storm. Emma woke in her dormitory at sunshine, her fingers instinctively reaching for her mother's silver cross. The weight of the day pressed down, making even the familiar routine of dressing feel monumental. Sarah helped arrange her hair, both women silent, words inadequate for the moment. "Ready?" Sarah finally asked, smoothing Emma's simple blue dress. "I've been ready since I first touched him," Emma replied. Across town, the municipal stables had transformed into an impromptu arena of justice. Court officials established a perimeter around the largest paddock, while veterinarians and equine behaviorists selected by the court conferred in serious tones. Dr. Hayes moved among them, his presence adding gravity to Emma's side of the dispute. When Megan's car arrived, Emma felt the crowd's attention shift like a physical wave. Hushed whispers followed her path from vehicle to waiting area, the crowd parting instinctively. "There must be hundreds of people," Emma murmured, sensing the press of bodies. "More arriving every minute," Megan confirmed. "This has touched something in people." Judge Montgomery arrived precisely at 9:30, his black SUV crawling through the throng. He surveyed the scene with thinly veiled surprise. What had begun as a simple property dispute had somehow transformed into a community event of unexpected proportions. "The court's experts are requesting that Tornado be brought to the demonstration paddock," announced the bailiff, consulting his clipboard. A tense ripple moved through the crowd as a heavy transport trailer approached, Blue Ridge Farm emblazoned on its gleaming side. Cooper emerged from a separate vehicle, immaculately dressed despite the informal setting, his expression betraying nothing. Brett trailed several steps behind, his usual confidence noticeably diminished. The trailer backed up to the paddock gate, but when handlers attempted to lower the ramp, a series of powerful kicks rattled the metal walls. The sound silenced the murmuring crowd. "He's refusing to exit," someone announced unnecessarily. Emma stood perfectly still, her head slightly tilted, listening to Tornado's distress. Every thud against the trailer wall carried a message she could read with painful clarity: confusion, betrayal, defensive rage. One of the court's selected experts, Dr. Reynolds, approached Judge Montgomery. "Your Honor, the animal is showing extreme agitation. I'm concerned about safety if we proceed." Emma overheard this exchange and stepped forward. "May I approach, Your Honor?" Montgomery considered briefly. "The purpose of this demonstration is to evaluate your connection with this animal. If you believe you can safely approach, you may proceed." Cooper's attorney immediately objected. "Your Honor, if the animal is deemed dangerous by experts, allowing an untrained minor to approach could create liability. Miss Sullivan has already demonstrated more success with this horse than your client's professionals," Montgomery interrupted. "The court will proceed." Emma moved toward the center of the paddock, her white cane sweeping in practiced arcs, establishing her position in the open space. The crowd fell silent, collective breath held in anticipation. "I'd like to speak to Tornado alone," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite its softness. "Just my voice. No other sounds, please." Judge Montgomery nodded to the bailiff, who instructed the handlers to step away from the trailer. The absolute silence that followed felt almost supernatural. Hundreds of people frozen in place, the only sound the occasional stamp of Tornado's hoof inside the metal confines. Emma took a deep breath and began to sing. The melody was ancient, an Appalachian ballad her mother had sung about mountains, standing witness to centuries of human struggle. Her voice floated across the paddock, clear and unpretentious, carrying with it memories of their first connection. Inside the trailer, Tornado's frantic movement stilled. The crowd watched in wonder as the violent thuds ceased, replaced by silence. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the sound of heavy breathing approaching the trailer's opening. Emma continued singing, the melody unwavering. She knew exactly what Tornado had experienced since their separation. Strange handlers, unfamiliar environments, the return of the fear-based responses that had originally labeled him dangerous. She poured this understanding into each note, creating a sound bridge between them. For long minutes, nothing changed. Then, slowly, a dark shadow appeared at the trailer's edge. Tornado's massive head emerged cautiously, nostrils flared wide, testing the air. His eyes, wild with recent trauma, scanned the unfamiliar surroundings until they found Emma's still figure in the center of the paddock. The collective gasp from the crowd nearly broke the spell. Emma faltered for only a moment before strengthening her voice, continuing the song that had first connected them. Tornado hesitated at the threshold, his powerful body trembling with conflicting impulses. The instinct to retreat to safety warring with the pull toward the one human who had offered understanding without demands. Emma felt his indecision as acutely as if it were her own, recognizing the courage required to choose trust over fear. With deliberate slowness, the massive Mustang stepped down the ramp. His movements were tense but controlled, each hoof placement a conscious decision rather than a fear response. The experts exchanged glances of professional astonishment as Tornado fully emerged, standing at the paddock's edge. Emma's song gentled, becoming more conversation than performance. She remained motionless, allowing Tornado complete freedom to approach or retreat as he chose. The Mustang took a tentative step forward, then another, his ears fixed on Emma with laser focus. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the horse that had terrorized professional handlers moved gradually across the paddock. His approach wasn't linear. He circled widely, spiraling inward with each rotation, a dance of caution and hope. Near the judges' area, Cooper's face hardened into a mask of controlled fury. His whispered conference with his attorneys grew increasingly heated as Tornado's behavior defied their expectations. "This proves nothing," he hissed. "The animal is simply curious about a stationary figure." As if hearing this challenge, Tornado suddenly stopped his approach, head raised in alarm. Emma sensed the shift immediately. "It's okay," she called softly, abandoning her song for direct reassurance. "I'm still here. Nothing has changed between us." For several heart-stopping moments, Tornado stood frozen, muscles bunched in preparation for flight. The experts tensed, preparing to declare the demonstration a failure. Emma's face remained serene, but her hands trembled slightly at her sides, the only visible sign of her emotional investment. Then, with deliberate purpose, she reached into her pocket and withdrew her small iPod. The familiar notes of another Appalachian ballad, this one about freedom found after captivity, drifted across the paddock. Emma began to hum along, creating a harmony with the recorded voice of her mother. The effect on Tornado was immediate and profound. His posture softened, recognition flooding through his powerful frame. With renewed purpose, he continued his approach, moving more directly now toward the center where Emma stood. When he reached her, the crowd collectively held its breath. Tornado circled Emma once, twice, his massive body dwarfing her slender form. Then, in a movement so deliberate it could not be misinterpreted, he stopped directly before her and lowered his head. Emma's hands reached out, finding his face with gentle precision. Her fingers traced the contours she had memorized during their secret sessions, identifying each scar, each worry line, each unique feature that made him Tornado. Tears slid silently from beneath her dark glasses as the connection, feared lost, restored itself fully between them. The Mustang released a deep sigh, his breath warm against Emma's arms. The sound carried a release of weeks of tension, fear, and isolation. For several minutes, girl and horse remained in silent communion, re-establishing the wordless language they had developed. Then, in a movement that drew audible gasps from even the most skeptical observers, Tornado gracefully folded his front legs and knelt before Emma. The posture, impossible to train, rare even among the most domesticated horses, represented a surrender more powerful than any demonstration of dominance. Photographers scrambled for position, capturing the extraordinary moment when the untamable Mustang knelt voluntarily before the blind girl. Emma's hand rested lightly on Tornado's powerful neck, her face illuminated with quiet joy. "Impossible," whispered one of Cooper's experts, the word carrying in the silence. Judge Montgomery stood transfixed, legal pad forgotten in his hand. In 30 years on the bench, he had developed a finely tuned detector for performance versus authenticity. What he witnessed transcended any possibility of manipulation or coincidence. "The court acknowledges the demonstration," he finally said, his judicial formality barely masking his awe. As Emma continued her quiet communion with Tornado, Brett Cooper suddenly moved forward. His face, usually a study in privileged indifference, showed unexpected emotion. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying the tremor of someone crossing a significant personal threshold, "I'd like to speak." Montgomery nodded, curiosity evident in his expression. "The first day when Emma met Tornado. It was my idea," Brett admitted, avoiding his father's furious stare. "I thought it would be funny to scare the blind girl from the charity tour. I brought her to Tornado's enclosure, telling her it was a gentle pony." A murmur of disapproval rippled through the crowd. "But what happened wasn't what I expected," Brett continued, his voice strengthening. "When she started singing, something changed. The horse that had been trying to kill everyone just recognized her somehow." He paused, struggling for words. "My father sees horses as money-making machines, but that day, I saw something different, something I can't explain." Randall Cooper's face flushed crimson. "Brett," "That's enough," he commanded through clenched teeth. "No, it's not enough," Brett replied, years of suppressed independence finding voice. "I've watched you destroy animals, people, whatever gets in your way. This," he gestured toward Emma and Tornado, "is real, and everybody here knows it." In the center of the paddock, Emma had begun to sing again, her voice joining with her mother's from the iPod in a duet that bridged worlds, past and present, human and animal, sight and blindness. Tornado remained kneeling, his massive head resting against her slight form, creating an image of harmony that defied conventional understanding. Photographers captured the scene from every angle, knowing instinctively that these images would extend far beyond a local legal dispute. Something fundamental was being challenged and redefined in that sunlit paddock. Assumptions about power, about communication, about who truly sees and who remains blind. As the court-designated hour drew to a close, Judge Montgomery consulted briefly with the expert panel. Their hushed conference ended with unanimous nods, their professional skepticism visibly transformed. "This court will reconvene tomorrow at 9 for the final verdict," Montgomery announced, his voice carrying the gravity of significant decision. "Until then, Tornado will remain here, with Miss Sullivan permitted supervised visits to ensure his continued well-being." As the crowd began to disperse, conversations erupting in excited analysis of what they'd witnessed, Randall Cooper stood isolated among the throng that now looked at him with new eyes. For the first time in his privileged existence, he faced not just the possibility of losing a legal battle, but something far more valuable that no amount of his millions could ever buy back. Judge Montgomery's words hung in the air as the crowd dispersed, leaving Randall Cooper standing alone amidst the shifting tide of public opinion. For the first time in decades, the certainty that had been his birthright wavered, replaced by an unfamiliar sensation he refused to acknowledge as fear. The following morning dawned with crisp autumn clarity. The courthouse steps were crowded again, the overnight buzz having drawn an even larger gathering. Inside, the historic courtroom filled to capacity long before 9 o'clock, forcing bailiffs to turn away disappointed spectators. Emma sat between Sarah and Megan, her fingers moving restlessly over the smooth wood of the table before her. The familiar sense of furniture polish and leather-bound books couldn't mask the electricity in the air, an entire community holding its breath, waiting for something previously unimaginable. Randall Cooper facing a meaningful defeat. When Judge Montgomery entered, his deliberate footsteps carried the weight of considered judgment. He settled behind the bench, arranged his papers methodically, then looked up to survey the packed courtroom. "Yesterday," he began, his voice measured, "this court witnessed something extraordinary, something that challenges conventional understandings about the relationship between humans and animals." He paused, fingers steepled before him. The law must occasionally evolve to accommodate new insights, even when those insights come from unexpected sources. Emma felt the collective tension in the room, a pressure almost physical against her skin. "This court finds that the evidence presented by Miss Sullivan and her witnesses is both compelling and unprecedented," Montgomery continued. "Therefore, I am establishing the following. First, Miss Sullivan will be granted supervised access to the horse known as Tornado for the purpose of continuing their demonstrably beneficial interaction." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. "Second, and perhaps more significantly, this court recognizes that the animal's emotional well-being constitutes a relevant factor in this and potentially future cases involving animal custody and care." The murmur swelled to a buzz of astonishment. Judge Montgomery raised a hand for silence. "While Mr. Cooper retains legal ownership, this ruling places conditions on that ownership based on the demonstrated unique relationship between Miss Sullivan and the animal in question." Court is adjourned. The gavel's crack barely registered before the room erupted in conversation. Emma sat motionless, tears sliding silently beneath her dark glasses as Megan squeezed her hand in triumph. Across the aisle, Cooper conferred intensely with his attorneys, his face a study in controlled fury. The courtroom gradually emptied, leaving Emma, Sarah, and Megan in a bubble of quiet celebration. "We did it," Megan said softly. And more importantly, you've created a legal precedent that could change how animals are viewed under the law. As they prepared to leave, a familiar voice interrupted their moment. Miss Sullivan. Emma turned toward Randall Cooper's distinctive tenor, the precise diction, the subtle arrogance even in defeat. I'd like a private word, if I may. Sarah began to object, but Emma touched her arm gently. It's all right. Cooper led them to a quiet alcove away from lingering observers. I've instructed my attorneys to prepare paperwork transferring ownership of Tornado to you, he said without preamble, his voice businesslike. My offer is $750,000, a fair market value that would enable you to provide properly for his care. Emma's expression remained neutral. You want to buy him for me? I'm a practical man, Miss Sullivan. The publicity from this case has been unfortunate. This solution allows everyone to save face. Mr. Cooper, Emma replied quietly, Tornado isn't an object to be transferred. He's made his choice already. Perhaps I wasn't clear. Cooper's tone hardened slightly. This is a generous offer that would secure your future and the horse's care. The alternatives are considerably less attractive for all involved. Thank you, but no, Emma said with gentle finality. I believe there's another way forward. 3 days later, Emma stood beside Dr. Hayes on the weathered porch of a long-abandoned property on the outskirts of Lexington. The old Jackson farm had once been a thriving horse operation before modern breeding facilities like Blue Ridge rendered its modest scale obsolete. 7 acres of good pasture, Hayes described as Emma's sensitive fingers explored the rough wooden railings. The main stable needs significant work, but the structure is sound. 3 paddocks, a small indoor training area, and the old farmhouse, basic but livable with some repairs. And the owner? Emma asked, her face turned toward the Kentucky breeze that carried hints of wild honeysuckle and distant hay fields. The Jackson family has been trying to sell for years. When I mentioned your situation, they seemed almost relieved that it might become a horse sanctuary rather than another housing development. Emma nodded, a vision forming in her mind's landscape. This is it, she said with quiet certainty. This is where Tornado belongs, where other horses like him can find peace. The following Sunday, Sarah drove Emma to Sunshine Children's Home's small chapel, where instead of the usual service, they found the room reconfigured for an impromptu community meeting. Chairs had been arranged in concentric circles, and the buzz of conversation fell into curious silence as Emma entered. Dr. Hayes stood to address the surprisingly large gathering. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As many of you know, Emma Sullivan has been granted access to continue her work with Tornado. What you may not know is that she has a larger vision, one that could transform how we approach traumatized horses throughout our region. For the next hour, Emma shared her dream of transforming the old Jackson farm into a sanctuary for horses that traditional methods had failed. Her quiet voice gained strength as she described a place where patience would replace force, where understanding would supplant dominance. I can't see with my eyes, she concluded, but sometimes that allows me to perceive what others miss. Tornado taught me that broken doesn't mean worthless. It just means needing a different kind of healing. The silence that followed felt sacred, a collective recognition of something authentic in a world increasingly defined by calculation and performance. Then, from the back of the room, an elderly carpenter stood. My father built those stables at the Jackson place. I'd be honored to help restore them. His simple offer broke the dam. A retired electrician volunteered to inspect the wiring. A roofing contractor promised materials at cost. Farmers offered hay, feed, equipment. What had begun as a presentation transformed into something older and deeper, a community discovering its best self through collective purpose. As summer faded into autumn, the transformation of the old Jackson farm became a weekend ritual for dozens of volunteers. Trucks arrived laden with lumber, tools, and willing hands. Families brought picnic lunches, creating an atmosphere that reminded older participants of the barn raisings of their grandparents' era. Emma moved through this revival with quiet wonder. her presence a constant reminder of the vision that had sparked such unexpected generosity. The legal emancipation process, expedited by Judge Montgomery's influence and Sarah's willing guardianship, allowed her to move into the small farmhouse with Sarah as renovations progressed. The heart of the sanctuary took shape first, a special stable designed with Tornado's specific needs in mind, incorporating both security and freedom of movement. When the Mustang finally arrived, transported by Jackson himself, who had refused any other handler, the moment carried ceremonial weight. Emma waited in the center of the paddock, listening to the trailer approach along the newly graveled driveway. Unlike his previous transport experiences, Tornado emerged calmly, head high, nostrils flaring to capture the sense of his new home. He moved directly to Emma, their reunion a wordless communication that needed no translation for the watching volunteers. "Welcome home," she whispered against his neck, her fingers finding the familiar patterns of his coat. In the weeks that followed, Emma and Tornado established a routine that became the foundation for the sanctuary's approach. Each morning began with quiet communion, Emma sitting in the paddock, sometimes singing, sometimes silent, while Tornado circled and eventually settled beside her. This shared stillness, observers noted, seemed to reset the Mustang's nervous system, preparing him for the small challenges each day might bring. As word of the sanctuary spread, so did opposition from unexpected quarters. Cooper, unable to accept his public defeat, began using his considerable influence to undermine the project. Banks suddenly declined loan applications for operating expenses. Feed suppliers developed mysterious inventory shortages. Potential donors received subtle warnings about associating with unproven ventures. "He's trying to starve us out," Jackson observed grimly one evening, having become the sanctuary's de facto operations manager. "Cooper plays the long game. He'll smile in public while cutting off our oxygen behind the scenes." These machinations might have succeeded if not for an unexpected ally. Brett Cooper arrived at the sanctuary one crisp October morning, his luxury sports car looking absurdly out of place amid the working trucks and modest vehicles of volunteers. "I want to help," he said simply, standing awkwardly before Emma on the farmhouse porch, his usual confidence replaced by genuine humility. "I know about my father's efforts to undermine this place. I can't stop him completely, but I can offer something he can't block." Brett's assistance proved invaluable, not just his financial contributions, carefully channeled through third parties to avoid his father's interference, but his growing commitment to physical labor. Volunteers watched with amazement as the privileged heir to Blue Ridge traded designer clothes for work boots, learning to repair fences and muck stalls alongside retired factory workers and small-town teachers. One afternoon, as smoke rose from the barbecue where volunteers gathered for a communal lunch break, Emma sat with Tornado under an ancient oak tree. Her fingers moved gently along his neck, finding the knotted muscles that still held memories of his capture and confinement. "You're helping more than just yourself," she told him softly. "You're showing people a different way to see, not just me, but everyone here." Tornado's response was a gentle nudging of her shoulder, his breath warm against her face. His progress had become a visible metaphor for the sanctuary itself, each day bringing small victories, occasional setbacks, but steady movement toward healing. The first challenge to this harmony arrived in the form of a pre-dawn fire that damaged one of the newly renovated stables. No horses were injured, but the pattern of accelerant left little doubt about human involvement. "Coincidence?" Sarah asked grimly as fire investigators moved through the charred remains. Jackson shook his head. "Cooper doesn't leave fingerprints, but he leaves signatures." The community's response was immediate and overwhelming. By nightfall, twice the number of usual volunteers had arrived, bringing additional materials and determined energy. What might have been a devastating setback instead became a rallying point, strengthening rather than weakening the collective commitment. Brett, witnessing this response, confronted his father in the mahogany-paneled study of the Cooper estate. Their argument, though private, shook the foundations of Blue Ridge's carefully maintained facade. "This ends now," Brett demanded, his voice carrying a newfound authority. "The fire, the pressure on suppliers, all of it. Or I go public with everything I know." Randall Cooper studied his son with cold calculation. "You would betray your own family? Your inheritance? For what? Some blind girl's fantasy project?" "No," Brett replied steadily. "For the first time in my life, I'd be honoring what our family was supposed to stand for, before winning became more important than decency." While observing from his hilltop estate the transformation of the abandoned farm into a vibrant center of recovery, Randall Cooper murmured to his assistant, "Discover every donor, every volunteer, every supplier who supports that place. I want to know exactly who chose the wrong side in this war." His words revealing that, far from accepting defeat, he merely receded to plan a counterattack more devastating. Cooper's network of influence extended like invisible spider silk throughout Lexington's financial community. The morning after his confrontation with Brett, the First National Bank of Kentucky called the sanctuary with apologetic tones. Their loan application for operational expenses had been reconsidered and denied. By afternoon, 3 feed suppliers had mysteriously run out of stock, and a scheduled donation from a local business foundation was abruptly withdrawn. Emma sat at the weathered kitchen table in the farmhouse, fingers tracing the grain of the wood as she listened to Sarah recounting these developments. The autumn sun streamed through windows, still bearing traces of decades-old paint, casting warmth that contrasted with the cold reality of their situation. "He's methodical," Emma observed quietly, "attacking the foundations rather than the structure itself." Sarah sighed, setting down her coffee mug with a sharp click. "We have enough feed for 2 weeks, maybe 3 if we stretch it. The electrical repairs are half finished, and winter's coming." The screen door creaked open as Jackson entered, his boots leaving dusty imprints on the recently swept floor. "Got more bad news?" he announced without preamble. "The lumber supplier just called. Our credit account's been frozen." Emma's face remained composed, but her fingers stilled on the tabletop. "He's trying to starve us out." "Cooper plays the long game," Jackson confirmed, lowering himself into a chair that protested under his weight. "He'll smile in public, make vague supportive statements about alternative approaches, while systematically cutting off our oxygen behind the scenes." That evening, as volunteers gathered for their now traditional Friday community dinner in the partially renovated barn, Emma felt the undercurrent of concern beneath the usual camaraderie. Conversations dipped into whispers when she approached, voices carrying the particular tension of people trying to protect someone from difficult truths. She made her way to Tornado's paddock, where the Mustang had established his nightly routine of watching the human gatherings from a calculated distance, close enough to observe, far enough to retreat if necessary. His ears pricked forward at her approach, a soft nickering acknowledging her presence. "They're worried," Emma told him, leaning against the fence rail. "They think we might fail." Tornado moved closer, his breath warm against her cheek as he stretched his neck over the rail. Emma reached up, her fingers finding the spot behind his ears that always seemed to carry tension. "You understand survival against the odds, don't you?" she murmured. "Everyone looking at you, seeing only what they expect to see. Dangerous, unmanageable, not worth the effort." The Mustang's response was a gentle pressure against her hand, pushing into her touch rather than away from it, a gesture that still surprised those who remembered his former defensiveness. Emma smiled, the connection between them a tangible reminder of why the sanctuary mattered. "Emma," Sarah's voice called from the barn doorway. "There's someone here to see you." Brett Cooper stood awkwardly amid the volunteer gathering, his designer clothes and manicured appearance creating a visible barrier between himself and the farmers, teachers, and retirees who formed the sanctuary's core support. His eyes, however, held none of his father's calculating coldness, only uncertainty and something that looked remarkably like hope. "I want to help," he said simply when Emma approached, guided by Sarah's light touch on her elbow. "I know about my father's efforts to undermine this place. I can't stop him completely, but I can offer something he can't block." Emma's head tilted slightly, her expression carefully neutral. Why would you go against your father now, Brett? Everything you have comes from him. Brett was silent for a moment, the background noise of conversation fading as volunteers pretended not to eavesdrop. Because for the first time in my life, I'm seeing clearly what our family business really costs, he finally replied. Not just in dollars, but in broken spirits, horse and human. His sincerity vibrated in the air between them, an almost tangible thing that Emma could sense more clearly than most. She nodded once, decisively. We need feed, lumber, and electrical supplies, and we need them from sources my father can't pressure. Brett's assistance transformed the sanctuary's immediate prospects. Working through friends from his college days, he established supply chains beyond Cooper's influence. More surprisingly, he began appearing daily, trading his luxury wardrobe for work clothes, joining renovation crews with initially clumsy but increasingly competent efforts. The sight of Randall Cooper's heir apparent carrying lumber alongside retired factory workers created a powerful narrative that spread through Lexington's complex social hierarchy. New volunteers arrived daily, some from unexpected quarters. Banking executives working alongside teachers, university students painting fences with church groups. One unusually warm October afternoon, Emma sat cross-legged in the center of the training ring while Tornado circled at a distance. This daily ritual had become the foundation of their work, Emma simply being present, offering connection without demand, allowing the Mustang to set the terms of engagement. You're different today, she observed quietly, her head tracking his movement through sound and air pressure. Something's bothering you. Tornado's circling tightened, his hoofbeats carrying a tension that Emma recognized from their earliest interactions. When he finally approached, his breath came in short bursts, muscles quivering beneath his glossy coat. You felt it before we did, Emma murmured, reaching up as he lowered his massive head to her level. Something's coming. The something arrived at 3 o'clock the following morning, flames erupting from the newly renovated feed storage building, spreading quickly toward the nearest stable. The fire alarm, installed just weeks earlier, shattered the pre-dawn silence with mechanical urgency. Emma woke instantly, disoriented, but moving with practiced efficiency. Sarah appeared in her doorway seconds later. Fire. East Stable. Jackson's getting the horses out. By the time they reached the yard, volunteers were arriving from nearby homes, headlights cutting through smoke that billowed black against the star-filled sky. The local fire department's sirens wailed in the distance, still minutes away. Emma moved instinctively toward Tornado's paddock, finding him pressed against the far fence, trembling with primeval fear. Fire represented a particular terror for horses, their evolutionary response to flee blocked by human-made enclosures. I'm here, she called, her voice pitched to carry through his panic. We're going to move away from the danger, together. As volunteers formed a bucket brigade and the first fire truck arrived, Emma opened Tornado's gate. Rather than bolting past her as many would expect from a frightened horse, he moved to her side, allowing her hand on his neck to guide him toward the safety of the back pasture. By dawn, the immediate danger had passed. The feed building was a total loss. One stable suffered significant damage, but all horses were safe, and no humans were injured. As volunteers gathered in the yard, exhausted but relieved, the fire chief approached Jackson with a grim expression. This wasn't accidental, he said quietly, but loud enough for nearby volunteers to hear. We found clear evidence of accelerant. Someone wanted this place to burn. Sarah's eyes met Jackson's across the smoky yard, the unspoken name hanging between them. Cooper. The community's response was swift and overwhelming. By noon, twice the number of usual volunteers had arrived, bringing additional materials, food, and determined energy. What might have been a devastating setback instead became a rallying point, strengthening rather than weakening the collective commitment. Local news crews arrived by midday, the fire's suspicious nature transforming a local interest story into something more sinister. When a reporter asked Emma about suspected arson, her response carried a quiet dignity that resonated far beyond their immediate circle. We're building something that challenges old ways of thinking, she said. Her face turned toward the rebuilt barn, where volunteers were already clearing debris. Change is always threatening to those who profit from the status quo. That evening, Brett confronted his father in the mahogany-paneled study of the Cooper estate. The room, designed to intimidate with its towering bookshelves and hunting trophies, had always made Brett feel small. Tonight, however, he stood with newfound certainty. "The fire has to be the end of it," he stated flatly, interrupting his father's practiced expression of sympathetic concern. "This ends now. The pressure on suppliers, the financial blockade, all of it. Or I go public with everything I know." Randall Cooper studied his son with the same clinical assessment he applied to potential breeding stock. "You would betray your own family? Your inheritance? For what? Some blind girl's fantasy project?" "No," Brett replied steadily. "For the first time in my life, I'd be honoring what our family was supposed to stand for, before winning became more important than decency." Cooper's laugh held no humor. "You've been at that sanctuary too long, son. You're starting to sound like one of them." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," Brett countered. "They're building something authentic. We're just accumulating more." The confrontation ended without resolution, but Brett's warning carried weight. Cooper recognized the potential damage if his son went public with internal Blue Ridge practices, the training methods, the disposal of injured horses, the manipulation of show judges that had become standard operating procedure. As October yielded to November, the sanctuary's resilience in the face of adversity attracted attention beyond local media. A regional equestrian magazine published a feature on their approach to traumatized horses. University researchers requested permission to document their methods. Most significantly, families with special needs children began inquiring about potential therapeutic programs. Emma worked with Dr. Hayes to develop a structured approach that could be replicated and taught to others. Their foundation was deceptively simple: presence before technique, connection before control, patience above all. "Most trainers try to make horses adapt to human timelines," Emma explained to a small group of visiting equine therapy specialists. "We adapt to theirs instead." The demonstration that followed provided powerful evidence of their success. Emma worked with Tornado in the training ring, using no restraints, no treats, no traditional tools of control. Through subtle shifts in her positioning, breathing, and energy, she guided the massive Mustang through a series of movements that looked less like commands obeyed and more like a dance between willing partners. "She's not controlling him," Hayes explained to the astonished visitors. "She's conversing with him, and he's choosing to respond." When a young psychiatric researcher asked about applying these principles to human trauma patients, Hayes smiled. "Emma's already ahead of you. Our first human equine therapy session is scheduled for next week." That session, involving a non-verbal autistic child and a former show jumper rescued from slaughter, became the prototype for the sanctuary's expanding mission. Observers noted the remarkable parallels between traumatized horses and humans with communication barriers, both responding to patience, consistent presence, and respect for their autonomy. Tornado, once considered too dangerous for human contact, proved especially responsive to children with special needs. His size and power, initially intimidating, became sources of wonder rather than fear. His heightened sensitivity, once labeled as nervous or reactive, allowed him to attune to the emotional states of children who struggled to express themselves conventionally. While the sanctuary's therapeutic programs developed rapidly, Cooper's opposition remained a constant shadow. Though direct attacks had ceased following Brett's ultimatum, subtler forms of resistance continued. Whisper campaigns questioning their methods, regulatory inspections appearing with suspicious frequency, potential major donors mysteriously losing interest after private conversations. "Agent Johnson, we're here with a federal warrant," announced the lead investigator, handing official documents to the suddenly pale-faced magnate. "We have reason to believe your operation is involved in systematic tax fraud, animal mistreatment, and most recently, criminal acts of sabotage against Tornado Sanctuary." Words that finally made Randall Cooper understand that his empire was about to crumble. The federal agents swept through Blue Ridge Farm with methodical precision, their government-issue SUVs and crisp badges creating a stark contrast against the manicured Kentucky elegance. For employees who had witnessed Randall Cooper's imperial reign for decades, the sight of him standing silently as agents boxed financial records provided a surreal punctuation to an era. Within days, details began emerging in carefully worded press releases. The investigation had originated with tax discrepancies, but expanded when evidence suggested systematic animal welfare violations and, most recently, potential criminal conspiracy related to the sanctuary fire. Cooper's initial bravado crumbled as the investigation uncovered layers of financial manipulation stretching back nearly 15 years. At the Tornado Sanctuary, a different kind of transformation unfolded. The spring morning carried the particular sweetness that Kentucky reserves for April. Dogwoods and redbuds painting the hills while new grass created a verdant canvas for healing. Emma stood in the center of the training ring, listening as Dr. Hayes led a seminar for visiting veterinary students from the University of Kentucky. What you're witnessing isn't a training method in the conventional sense, Hayes explained to the assembled students. It's a complete paradigm shift in how we understand equine psychology after trauma. Emma demonstrated with Tornado, who now moved around her in a dance of mutual awareness. Where traditional methods emphasized control through pressure and release, Emma's approach inverted the relationship entirely, offering presence without demand, connection without agenda. Notice how she doesn't try to make the horse do anything, Hayes pointed out. She creates a space where the horse chooses engagement. A skeptical student raised his hand. But how is this practical? Not everyone has months to wait for a horse to decide to cooperate. Emma smiled, turning toward the voice. That's exactly the attitude that creates traumatized animals in the first place. We're so focused on our human timelines that we ignore what the horse is communicating. As if to demonstrate this point, Tornado suddenly tensed, his ears swiveling toward the entrance where a delivery truck had arrived. Emma immediately registered the change, adjusting her posture and energy to acknowledge his concern rather than override it. "See what just happened?" Hayes asked the group. In traditional training, that reaction would be labeled disobedience and corrected. Emma recognizes it as communication and responds accordingly. The students watched in fascination as Emma stood quietly, allowing Tornado to process the perceived threat. When he eventually returned his attention to her, the choice was entirely his, a decision made from trust rather than compulsion. "This isn't just about horses," Emma added softly. "It's about recognizing that control isn't the same as connection." The sanctuary's approach continued gaining recognition beyond Kentucky. A documentary filmmaker spent 3 weeks capturing their methods, focusing particularly on the children's therapy program that had begun to show remarkable results. Children who struggled with conventional therapies often experienced breakthroughs in the presence of the rescued horses, particularly Tornado. "He sees them differently," Emma explained to the filmmaker as they watched 8-year-old Marcus, a boy with severe autism, sitting quietly beside Tornado. "Horses don't care about diagnoses or developmental milestones. They respond to authentic presence." Marcus, who rarely initiated physical contact with humans, had developed a ritual of gently stroking Tornado's left foreleg, precisely where the Mustang bore a scar from his capture. Something in the shared experience of injury and recovery created a bridge between them that transcended verbal communication. While public recognition grew, Emma remained focused on expanding their practical impact. The manual she developed with Dr. Hayes, systematically documenting their approach to equine rehabilitation, was gaining adoption at progressive stables throughout the country. What had begun as instinctive connection between one girl and one horse was evolving into a methodology that challenged generations of accepted practice. "It's not about rejecting all traditional horsemanship," Emma clarified during a radio interview. "It's about questioning methods based on dominance rather than partnership." This nuanced approach attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Several established trainers began visiting, initially skeptical but increasingly curious about techniques that achieved results without force. Even more significantly, small groups of thoroughbred industry insiders began quiet conversations about implementing elements of the sanctuary's approach in racing operations. On a particularly beautiful May afternoon, Brett Cooper led a group of his father's former business associates through the sanctuary. These men, wealthy, influential, and historically aligned with traditional breeding operations, moved through the facility with expressions ranging from curiosity to guarded interest. "The numbers speak for themselves," Brett explained as they observed a therapy session. "Recovery rates for traumatized horses are nearly double the industry standard, and the therapeutic outcomes for children are drawing attention from medical researchers." Emma, sensing the importance of this visit, joined the group with Tornado walking freely beside her. The Mustang's transformation from dangerous outcast to centered, confident presence created a powerful visual testament to their methods. "Gentlemen," Emma addressed them directly, "I understand you're here because you're considering financial support. But I hope you're also considering something more valuable, a different way of thinking about the relationships between humans and horses." That evening, as sunset painted the Kentucky hills with amber light, Emma sat with Sarah on the farmhouse porch. The sanctuary had grown beyond anything they had initially imagined. 5 full-time staff, dozens of regular volunteers, and 15 horses in various stages of rehabilitation. "Cooper's trial starts next month," Sarah mentioned, handing Emma a glass of lemonade. "The prosecutor called today. They may want you to testify about the fire." Emma nodded, her fingers finding the familiar chip on the porch railing. "Everything's connected, isn't it? Cooper's fall, our growth, Tornado's healing. Like we're all part of some larger story none of us fully understands." Across the paddock, Tornado grazed peacefully beside a recently rescued thoroughbred, a former racehorse discarded after a career-ending injury. The Mustang had taken on an unexpected role as a stabilizing presence for new arrivals, his hard-won confidence somehow communicating safety to other traumatized animals. The following week brought a development that further validated their approach. The University of Kentucky's College of Agriculture announced a research partnership to formally study the sanctuary's rehabilitation techniques, with Dr. Hayes appointed as liaison between academic research and practical application. "This legitimizes everything we've been working toward," Hayes told Emma as they reviewed the agreement. "It moves these methods from anecdotal success to documented, peer-reviewed outcomes." While this institutional recognition marked a significant milestone, the most profound validation came in smaller, more intimate moments, like the afternoon when Mia Rodriguez first visited the sanctuary. The 12-year-old with cerebral palsy had exhausted conventional therapeutic options, her frustrated parents bringing her to Tornado Sanctuary as a last resort. Emma, who had developed an intuitive system for matching children with specific horses, recognized something special in Mia's energy, a determination that mirrored Tornado's own resilience. Against the cautious advice of staff who suggested a smaller, more traditionally docile therapy horse, Emma introduced Mia directly to the Mustang. "He's so big," Mia whispered, her voice strained by the effort of controlling her vocal muscles. "Yes," Emma agreed, guiding Mia's hand to Tornado's neck. "But size isn't the same as gentleness or understanding. Sometimes the strongest beings are also the most gentle." The connection was immediate and extraordinary. Tornado lowered his massive head to Mia's wheelchair level, his breath soft against her face. The girl's body, usually tense with involuntary movements, visibly relaxed at his touch. What followed over subsequent sessions defied conventional therapeutic expectations. Mia began speaking more clearly during her time with Tornado. Her physical therapist reported improved motor control after rides where Emma and another handler supported her on the Mustang's bare back. Most remarkably, Mia smiled, a full, uninhibited expression that her mother tearfully admitted was rare in her daily life. "He doesn't see the wheelchair," Mia explained with simple wisdom during her 4th visit. "He just sees me." As spring yielded to summer, the sanctuary hosted its first public education day, an open house designed to share their approach with the broader community. Hundreds of visitors moved through the carefully organized stations, learning about equine psychology, trauma recovery, and therapeutic applications. Emma conducted demonstrations with Tornado in the main ring, showing how connection-based approaches differed from traditional training. The Mustang, once considered too dangerous for public interaction, now moved with balanced confidence among strangers, his transformation embodying the sanctuary's core philosophy. Our methods aren't mystical or magical, Emma explained to the gathered crowd. They're based on respect, patience, and understanding that horses, like humans, respond better to invitation than to force. Among the visitors that day was a figure few immediately recognized. Randall Cooper, noticeably aged by legal battles and public disgrace, stood quietly at the back of the crowd. His once commanding presence had diminished, his designer clothes replaced by simpler attire that suggested diminished circumstances. Emma, however, recognized his presence immediately. Years of blindness had refined her ability to detect people by the subtle signatures of their movement, breathing, and energy. She continued her demonstration without acknowledgement, but was unsurprised when he approached afterward as the crowd dispersed. "You've built something remarkable here," Cooper said, his voice carrying none of its former imperious certainty. "Thank you," Emma replied simply, her hand resting on Tornado's neck. "I came to see what Brett finds so compelling," Cooper continued. "He's never committed to anything before." "Not really." Emma nodded, sensing the complex emotions beneath his words. A father's grudging acknowledgement of his son's independence, a businessman's recognition of success achieved through methods he had opposed. Their conversation might have ended there, a brief, awkward exchange between former adversaries. But at that moment, Mia Rodriguez's therapy session began in the adjacent ring. Cooper turned to watch as the young girl, supported by handlers, was carefully positioned on Tornado's back. The transformation was immediate and visible. Mia's face, often constricted by the effort of controlling her muscles, bloomed into an expression of pure joy. Tornado moved with extraordinary gentleness, each step measured to provide stability for his precious cargo. "I've spent my life making champions," Cooper said quietly, watching the scene. "But I've never seen anything like that." "It's not about making," Emma replied. "It's about allowing." When the session ended and Mia was lifted from Tornado's back, her smile remained, a lingering effect that her mother confirmed would sometimes last for days. The girl's hand reached out to stroke the Mustang's neck in their farewell ritual, a gesture of gratitude that needed no words. Cooper observed this exchange with an expression that surprised those who knew him in his former life, something approaching humility. Before departing, he approached Emma one final time, handing her a leather portfolio. "I was going to sell these at auction," he explained, "but after today, I thought perhaps they belong here instead." Inside were transfer documents for 5 young horses, promising animals that would once have entered Cooper's high-pressure training program. "You had reason," he admitted, his voice roughened by emotion. "I spent my entire life dominating horses, and never understood any of them." Cooper's unexpected gift of 5 young horses, promising animals that would have once entered his rigorous training program, marked a turning point not just for the sanctuary, but for the man himself. As Emma's fingers traced over the transfer documents, she sensed the weight of this gesture beyond its material value. These weren't merely horses, they were acknowledgments of a truth Cooper had spent decades denying. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice carrying no triumph, only quiet appreciation. "They deserve a chance," Cooper replied, the gruffness in his tone barely masking deeper emotion. "A different path than the one I would have given them." 2 years after that first electric touch between a blind girl and a wild Mustang, Kentucky spring unfurled across the sanctuary with paintbrush precision. Dogwoods scattered white blossoms like stars against the emerging green, while redbud trees added brush strokes of purple along the rolling fence lines. The once dilapidated Jackson farm had transformed into a living testament to second chances, expanded stables housing 15 rescued horses, a covered arena for therapy sessions, and fields vibrant with possibility. Emma stood at the center of this transformation, no longer the hesitant orphan but a young woman of 20 whose quiet authority drew respect from visitors and volunteers alike. On this particular morning, she welcomed representatives from 3 different states who had come to study the Tornado model, with plans to replicate it in their own regions. "The core principle isn't complicated," Emma explained as they toured the main stable. "Traditional training asks how quickly we can make a horse submit. We ask how we can create conditions where the horse chooses partnership." Dr. Hayes, now officially the sanctuary's research director, added scientific context. The physiological markers are remarkable. Cortisol levels in traumatized horses drop significantly faster using Emma's methods than with conventional approaches. The visitors observed a demonstration where Emma worked with a recently rescued thoroughbred, a former racehorse discarded after breaking down at Churchill Downs. The animal still carried the hypervigilance common to horses pushed beyond their physical limits, his eyes rolling at sudden movements, muscles tensed for flight. Rather than restraining or correcting this behavior, Emma simply sat in the center of the round pen, occasionally humming softly, one of her mother's Appalachian ballads that had first connected her with Tornado. She made no demands, offered no treats, applied no pressure. To the untrained eye, nothing appeared to be happening. "This looks like inaction," one visitor commented skeptically. "Watch more closely," Hayes suggested. "She's communicating constantly, just not in ways we're conditioned to recognize." Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the thoroughbred's breathing pattern shifted. His circling slowed, each revolution bringing him slightly closer to the still figure at the center. After 20 minutes, he paused, nostrils flaring as he processed Emma's scent, her energy, her intentions. "The moment of choice," Hayes whispered to the observers. "This is where conventional training would apply pressure. Emma offers space instead." When the horse finally approached, lowering his head to investigate Emma's outstretched hand, the connection was visibly electric. Not the submission of a broken spirit, but the cautious interest of one being recognizing another as trustworthy. "Every horse's timeline is different," Emma explained afterward. "Some take days, others months. We adapt to their needs rather than forcing them to adapt to ours." The sanctuary's impact extended far beyond horses. The therapeutic program had expanded to serve children with various challenges: autism, cerebral palsy, emotional trauma, who found in these recovered horses a unique form of understanding. Equine therapists from across the country now applied for residencies, eager to learn methods that consistently produced results conventional approaches couldn't match. Sarah Johnson, observing a therapy session from the viewing area, smiled as she watched Brett Cooper guiding a 7-year-old boy with Down syndrome toward Tornado. The transformation in Randall's son had been nearly as remarkable as the Mustang's, his once entitled demeanor replaced by authentic purpose. "He's our best volunteer with the kids," remarked the lead therapist, joining Sarah at the window. "Something about shared recovery, I think. The children sense it." In the arena, Tornado stood perfectly still as Brett lifted the boy onto his back. The Mustang, once considered too dangerous for even experienced handlers to approach, now carried the most vulnerable with extraordinary awareness, his massive body becoming a gentle vessel of healing. "He's not scared," the boy exclaimed with delight, his hands finding the security of Tornado's mane. "No," Brett agreed, "and neither are you." That evening, as sunset painted the horizon in watercolor strokes of amber and rose, Emma and Sarah sat on the farmhouse porch, the day's accomplishments settling around them like gentle dust. "The University of Louisville called today," Sarah mentioned, passing Emma a mug of tea. "They want you to speak at their veterinary conference next month, and the manual has gone into its 3rd printing." Emma nodded, her fingers tracing the weathered porch railing that had become as familiar as her own hands. "Dr. Hayes said there are now 8 sanctuaries using our methods in 4 states. From one horse to a movement," Sarah mused. "Not bad for an orphan girl and a dangerous Mustang." The soft sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn. Jackson, who had transitioned from unemployed handler to the sanctuary's operations director, joined them on the porch, the wooden steps creaking beneath his weight. "Got something you should know," he said, settling into the chair beside Sarah. "Cooper's selling Blue Ridge." Emma's expression remained neutral, though her fingers stilled on her mug. "Because of the legal troubles?" "Partly," Jackson confirmed. "The federal case has stripped most of his assets. But Brett says there's more to it. Something shifted in him after that day with Mia and Tornado." The memory of that day remained vivid. Mia Rodriguez, the 12-year-old with cerebral palsy, experiencing the freedom of movement on Tornado's back, her face transformed by joy as the Mustang carried her with intuitive gentleness. Later that week, Cooper himself appeared at the sanctuary, not the commanding figure of 2 years prior, but a man humbled by consequences, seeking something even he couldn't fully articulate. He found Emma in the small office she shared with Dr. Hayes, where she was reviewing therapy session notes dictated into her specialized recorder. "Miss Sullivan," he began, the formality a vestige of his former self, "I was hoping for a few minutes of your time." Emma gestured to the chair across from her desk, her expression open but unreadable. "Of course." Cooper settled heavily, the leather creaking beneath him. "I've been watching what you've accomplished here," he said, "not just with horses, but with people, with the community." Emma waited, sensing more beneath his words. "I spent my life building an empire based on control," Cooper continued, each word carrying the weight of difficult recognition. "Controlling horses, employees, outcomes. I believed that was strength." Outside the window, Tornado moved across the nearest paddock with fluid grace, his once aggressive movements transformed into balanced confidence. Cooper watched him, something like wonder crossing his weathered face. "I passed that belief to Brett," he admitted. "But he's found something better here, something real. I see it in how he's changed." Emma nodded. "Brett has become an essential part of what we do. His connection with the children is remarkable." "That's why I came," Cooper said, turning back to face her. "I'm selling Blue Ridge. Most of the proceeds will go toward the federal settlement, but I've arranged for a portion to establish a foundation for equine-assisted therapy. I'd like Brett to manage it, with your guidance." The significance of this gesture, Cooper relinquishing not just wealth but control to his son and a former adversary, wasn't lost on Emma. "That's a generous offer." "Not generosity," Cooper corrected. "Recognition. I spent a lifetime seeking respect through fear when I could have earned it through compassion." The moment marked not just personal redemption, but a shift in the community's approach to horses, a subtle realignment that rippled outward as former Blue Ridge employees found positions at the sanctuary or smaller operations adopting similar philosophies. This evolution was most visible during the sanctuary's second anniversary celebration, where several hundred community members gathered to witness the unveiling of the new therapy arena, a state-of-the-art facility funded largely by donations from people who had once aligned with Cooper's methods. The highlight came when Emma and Tornado entered the arena for a demonstration that required no words. Moving together with a synchronicity that appeared almost supernatural, they embodied the partnership that had inspired everything around them. Without saddle or bridle, communicating through the subtlest shifts in Emma's body position and energy, they created a dance of mutual trust that silenced even the restless children in the audience. "This isn't about control," Emma explained afterward, her hand resting lightly on Tornado's neck. "It's about conversation, about listening as much as asking." As summer reached its zenith, Emma's acceptance letter arrived from a specialized program in animal behavior, a course designed to accommodate her unique perspective and abilities. The university had created a customized approach that would allow her to expand the theoretical framework behind her intuitive methods. "You've earned this," Sarah said as they discussed the opportunity over dinner. "The sanctuary is stable enough now for you to take this next step." Emma nodded, fingers tracing the embossed letterhead. "It feels like closing a circle somehow, learning formally about what I've been doing instinctively." In the pre-dawn stillness, several days later, Emma woke with an inexplicable certainty that she needed to be outside. Dressing quickly in the darkness, she made her way to Tornado's paddock, where the Mustang waited as if expecting her, his familiar nickering a greeting that required no sight to recognize. Opening the gate, Emma felt the particular electricity that had characterized their relationship from the first moment. Without hesitation, she placed her hand on his back and, with the fluid movement developed through countless hours together, swung herself onto his bare back. They moved through the sanctuary grounds in perfect harmony, Emma's body attuned to every shift in Tornado's muscles, his awareness accommodating her blindness as naturally as breathing. As they reached the eastern pasture, the first hints of dawn painted the horizon in colors Emma could sense rather than see. A warming of the air, a subtle shift in the way sound carried. Tornado broke into a gentle canter, then a full gallop that carried them across the open field. For Emma, this was flight. This was freedom. This was connection in its purest form. The girl who had never seen the hills experienced them through the rhythm of hoofbeats, through the morning air rushing past her face, through the perfect trust between her body and Tornado's. As the sun crested fully over the sanctuary Tornado, illuminating horses and humans who had found healing in their mutual connection, Emma whispered into her companion's ear, "Some say we're broken, but maybe we're just different, and maybe it's that difference that allows us to see what others cannot."